This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Apple's still minting more money than God, right?
Geopolitics front and center for global Wall Street.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off of another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Lisa Mateo, Michael Barr. An extraordinary Thursday. Economic data today. News out of China that moves markets worldwide. Stocks up substantially. S&P up 0.8% on futures. The Swiss Act, they cut rates for those wired into global Wall Street. That's a big deal. But here in New York City, none of it compares to what we're seeing. David Gura, I think we've got to paint the picture right now. Last night on Fifth Avenue at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a spectacular event for the UN. I thought it was a Met Gala again. I was looking for, Ariana Grande and Emirati Khan to come up the steps. No, it was President Biden and others, including Mayor Adams, over the shadow of the news flow this Thursday morning.
Yeah, the President and First Lady hosting this reception for global leaders at the Met, and shortly thereafter we get news that the mayor of the city has been indicted. That is still sealed. We expect that to be unsealed this morning. We don't know the substance of the charge or charges in that indictment, but this is the culmination of kind of a sprawling investigation that has spanned several years, most of his mayoralty, and has led to the resignation of many of his top aides.
Miles Miller will be with us. Michael Barr, of course, following this story tick by tick. Matthew Haig publishing 15 minutes ago in the New York Times. David, let me read this verbatim. About 6 a.m. Thursday, nearly a dozen men and women dressed in business attire arrived in SUVs outside the entrance of the wonderful Gracie Mansion up on the East River. They go on to say one had a federal law enforcement placard on the dashboard. They walked through the building's East Gate carrying briefcase, backpacks, and bags. What should we look for in this indictment?
There is speculation that this is, as you've read the report from the New York Times, they're the first to report the existence of this indictment, have said that this centers on ties that the mayor has had to the country of Turkey. Of course, this is UN week. We were talking about that just a moment ago, and we have the president of Turkey here in New York, but might have to do with donations made by Turkey, donations that made to the Adams campaign. We'll see what's in there, but you paint that picture of what's been going on at Gracie Mansion, and after this news broke last night, I confess I watched a lot of New York One. They'd set up camp there, and there was a lot of speculation. Was he in the building? Who was coming in and out? What was the scene inside Gracie Mansion? We did get this short video message from the mayor last night, he vowing to fight these charges once they are unsealed.
We'll continue to follow this story here at Bloomberg Radio across the nation. Good morning on YouTube internationally. An extraordinary news flow. We are thrilled that we will start strong in moments with Rob Sockin of Citigroup on the international lift to markets. From the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
You got it. We have futures advancing, tracking gains in Asia after China pledges fiscal stimulus. Stocks in China, Hong Kong rose more than 4%. Tech shares climbing. NASDAQ futures up nearly 1.5%. That's a big thanks to Micron Technology. Strong lift there. Strong revenue forecast from AI demand. We have Micron shares up 14%. Then you check in with other chip players. NVIDIA up more than 1%. ASML, ADRs up more than 4%. Advanced Micro Devices up 2%. Let's get over to S&P futures up 0.8%. We have Dow futures up 0.5%. The 2-year yield 3.54%. That's down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 3.77%, and that's down 1 basis point. Few companies making news. OpenAI, sources saying it's talking about giving CEO Sam Altman a 7% equity stake in the company and restructuring to become a for-profit business. Now, this comes after a number of senior managers have left the company. And speaking of leaving the company, layoffs coming to Disney's corporate level. It's part of this ongoing effort to improve profitability. Deadline reporting about 300 jobs were affected. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and David.
Lisa, thanks so much. I've just learned this in the 9 o'clock hour. Ethan Bronner of Tel Aviv, Israel, with Bloomberg News will join us. He is definitive on the many conflicts and wars of the Levant. We need to get right to our guests. David and I can talk all day and monopolize it. Forget about it. More important is Rob Sockin tying all things together. It's Citigroup. I want to go to China. And I thought I'd have to wait for at least 2 cups of Tang and Sanka to get to fiscal support. It happened in 24 hours, 48 hours. The Politburo comes out today and says they will provide fiscal stimulus to China. What does that signal?
Yeah, and I was like you as well. I thought this would be drip stimulus throughout the year, and maybe we get some more in 2025. This shows that China can move on a dime. We saw that earlier in the cycle when they opened the floodgates, getting rid of their zero COVID policy. Now, what does it mean? It's good news. It's more than I would have expected, but we'll have to see how the boots hit the ground and how the stimulus impacts the economy. Right now, we have a consumer there who's very unwilling to spend. Confidence is very low, and the economy's been mostly supported by the external sector. So we'll see if the stimulus is able to lift animal spirits. I think it's good news, but we'll have to wait, see how effective it is.
I go back to the conversation that we had in the lead up to the Fed meeting last week, and there was the speculation that if the Fed were to go big, that would showcase panic on the part of the central bank. Let's step back and look at these actions by the Chinese government, by the PBOC. Explain to us sort of why they're moving on a dime, why they feel the need to do this, how urgent the situation is in the Chinese economy more broadly.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think probably they were looking at an economy as we were that was at real risk of falling short of their growth target. We recently marked down growth a bit more this year prior to these announcements, and growth next year. I know others have been marking down growth as well. And we had seen risks still skewed to the downside and had not been expecting any type of large stimulus. So I think they're seeing the data that's been coming over the last few months, which has been broadly softer than expected, and the soft data signaling even more softness. Right. So I think they got spooked by the data.
Andrew Hollenhorst this morning is looking at Euro Swissy, along with everybody else in global Wall Street. The Swiss National Bank, as they did in 2015, acts. They say enough with Swiss franc strength. We're going to cut interest rates to protect our economy. How does that tie in for our American listeners and viewers to see SNB act?
Yeah, I think really what that signals is that the exchange rate does play a role in a lot of how these central banks think. And as the Fed is easing policy more broadly, we think that opens the door for other central banks to ease as well. They don't have to worry.
It's one big global rate cut.
It's one big global rate cut.
It's Jay Powell. Good morning, Bill Rhodes, the wonderful Bill Rhodes. Jay Powell is central banker to the world.
Jay Powell is central banker to the world. And I think this is going to open the door, especially if the Fed, as Andrew's been writing, continues to go more aggressively. That's going to open up the door for these other central banks to
They nailed the vector. I mean, they nailed it going up. This Hollenhorst kid. First of all, he went to UCLA. David, what is college in Los Angeles?
Well,
are you kidding me?
A lucky man.
I mean, he nailed it going up, and now he's nailing it going down with a lot of rate cuts to come.
Ron, what are you listening for today when we get this pre-taped recording from the Fed chair? This has been a week, a cacophony of Fed speakers. Yeah. Now the big one comes out and gives what I guess will be just 10 minutes remarks, pre-recorded, as I say. What are you listening for? What is going to give you any indication of sort of where we're headed from those remarks today?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for this one, I'm not looking for too much because I don't think we've gotten a lot of data that can really move the needle. So I think it's going to sound pretty similar to how the last decision sounded and how he sounded during his press conference. But more broadly from the Fed, I'm really looking for how concerned are they about the dynamics in the labor market? I don't think it's about inflation that much for them anymore.
Right.
They're not worried about the upside risk. They said they're not going to deteriorate much more weakness in the labor market. They tell us the unemployment
What's Citigroup
rates.
think?
We think that the labor, Andrew's team thinks that the labor market's going to continue to weaken. They're going to have to go 50 again. And they've already told us where that bar is. They said in their summary of economic projections.
Come on,
unemployment rate
politically it's
moves
got
up
to
a
be
little bit.
5.0% is like bigger than Dow 10,000.
Well, if you get that high, as our team expects, you're going to get a rapid rate cutting cycle.
Okay.
But if the unemployment rate kind of stays near where it is and conditions stabilize, then you're going to get a more gradual rate cutting cycle. So it really comes down to labor market conditions.
20 seconds. You want to comment on why the Yankees can't get it done?
I've been a long-term Mets fan. I don't know if that cancels me on the podcast.
I saw Linder walking into the stadium. Linder's back is really bad, isn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely. So on the Yankees
Do
and
we allow Mets people on here?
That's what I was asking. I was scared to say it. I wasn't sure.
Special dispensation on this Thursday morning.
Rob Sockin, thank you
Thanks
so much. I'm sorry, folks. I'm hardwired 1986. I can't follow the Mets. I look at the TV and I can't watch it. Rob Sockin, Citigroup, thank you so much. You got Lisa. Would you help Mr. Sockin out of the chair? It's awfully early in the morning, 7:09 a.m. Get him out of here. Here's where we are in the equity markets, folks. Futures, S&P futures up 47, Dow futures up 200, NASDAQ, thank you, Micron, thank you, Idaho, up 1.5%. On the NASDAQ, that level 20,047 on NASDAQ 100. The VIX, give me some love. You're going to get a 14 handle here, 15.19 on the VIX. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, David, Lisa. New York City Mayor Eric Adams has been indicted following a federal corruption investigation. Bloomberg's John Tucker has more.
Eric Adams is the first mayor in New York City history to be indicted while in office. Sounding bitter and defiant, he released a video statement and refused calls from fellow Democrats to resign.
You elected me to lead this city, and lead it I will. I humbly ask for your prayers and your patience.
The indictment is sealed. Federal investigators had seized Adams' electronic devices nearly a year ago as part of an investigation focused at least partly on campaign contributions and Adams' interactions with the Turkish government. John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
In Florida, residents bought up sandbags and continued storm preparations as Hurricane Helene barreled toward the Panhandle. Helene has already prompted many evacuations from 20 counties, schools to close, and officials to declare emergencies in both Florida and Georgia ahead of its landfall tonight. Some Tallahassee residents say they're worried about this storm.
We've never taken that direct hit. It's supposed to be moving fast, so I'm worried about the winds more than the water. We got 3 big trees over the house. One of them's 500 years old. And I'm not sure that tree's ever seen a storm like this.
Forecasters say unsurvivable storm surges could be up to 20 feet high. Israel ordered the military to maintain its bombardment of Hezbollah targets in Lebanon and denied interest in a truce deal, complicating efforts by the U.S. and allies to avoid full-blown war. Foreign Minister Israel Katz said on X today there will be no ceasefire. Katz went on to say, "We will continue to fight the Hezbollah terror group with full force until victory." Meanwhile, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will address the annual United Nations General Assembly tomorrow. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, David, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. David, let's go over the processes. Miles is going to join us here in a moment, so let's not dive into the weeds here. Miles can do that for us with the latest update. The mayor's been indicted, but then they wait to look at the paperwork.
They have to unseal it, so that'll happen today, and we'll get
in a courtroom.
Yes. Downtown, Southern District, and we'll get a sense then of what's going to happen next. And as you heard there, the mayor vowing to stay on the job. There are mechanisms that the governor has at her disposal. She could suspend him,
I saw that,
remove him. That's not being talked about seriously at that point, but that is something that she has in
Under
her back
any
pocket.
indictment, does the person have to show up for the unsealing?
Customarily, yes. I think another question is, would he be arrested? So we'll see how all of that plays out over the course of the week.
We don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot that we don't know, but the existence of this thing is dramatic and important in and of itself.
Well, we're going to have to see on that. We've got lots of good people at Bloomberg News, including Michael Barr, covering this story as well. I really want to make a shout out to someone with immense experience, Patricia Hurtado, leading our coverage at Bloomberg News here. Our headline, New York City Mayor Eric Adams indicted after federal corruption probe. We are nationwide, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Well, after taking a breather, stocks looking up again right now. NASDAQ futures leading the gains up nearly 1.5%, 292 points. We have Dow futures up 0.4%, S&P futures up 0.7%. The two-year yield, 3.54%. That's down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 3.77%, and that's down 1 basis point. Stocks in China, Hong Kong rose more than 4% after Beijing pledges stronger policy support for the economy. Over to commodities. Oil slumped for a second day. That's the prospect of higher supplies from Saudi Arabia. We have Brent crude $71 a barrel, WTI crude $67 a barrel. To earnings we go. CarMax reported net sales, operating revenue, second quarter beat estimate. But here's the thing, quarterly earnings per share missed. Shares are down about 5%. And shares of IT services company Accenture up 3%. It beat earnings estimates and also raised its dividend. And then after the bell, we move on to Costco. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and David.
Lisa, thanks so much. You're going to fold an equity strategy on a global basis. David Gura mentioned this the other day, the commodity comeback that is sort of in the works with the China comeback. And, of course, so much of that affects Latin America, and of course there's the trade and all. We thought we'd get a briefing here with someone working with Franklin Templeton years ago and at McKinsey, now at HSBC. Nicole Inouye joins us, head of U.S. and LATAM equity strategy at HSBC. Nicole, what do tariffs do from Mexico down to, where'd you take that sabbatical, David? You went to, didn't you go to Patagonia and find yourself one year? Nicole, from Patagonia north to the Mexican border, what do tariffs do?
Well, let's start with Mexico. Mexico has always been this structural growth story that we've been excited about because of this nearshoring theme. So, Mexico's across the border. Mexico actually has surpassed China in terms of the size of the trading partner with the U.S. So Mexico has become, it's important for the U.S. The U.S. is important for Mexico. And, this has been a reason why we've liked the Mexico equity story because of these structural themes. It's nearshoring, it's remittances as well. So all of these have really, have been the backbone behind the structural growth story in Mexico. We've had an election. We have a new president. We will have a new president in the United States. So, some of that comes into question if this structural growth story will be sustained. And we've seen the reaction in the stock market in Mexico over the past couple of months. And Brazil, you talked about commodities. Obviously, commodities are very important. Iron ore is very important. China is important. And so we've seen a little bit of a comeback in iron ore prices, which is positive for some of the stocks and for Brazil in general.
Help us understand, I'm going to pick up on what Tom asked you, the dynamic between Mexico and U.S. when you look at companies right now. And so we've had these two kind of marquee economic speeches, at least those billed as such, by Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. And in that one that Donald Trump gave, he talked about John Deere in particular, saying he would levy this 200% tax. This is a company that has moved some manufacturing to Mexico. He sees that as a threat. What is that relationship like? You talked about nearshoring. How robust is that at this point? How vital is that to U.S. companies? I was struck just looking at a statement from John Deere after the former president's remarks, so adamant that they still see themselves as this company in Moline, Illinois, still very much a U.S. company, but nodding to the fact that having that kind of broader manufacturing footprint with Mexico is so critical to them today.
Mm-hmm. So, in Mexico, we look at FDI and see how important that is for the country in general. So, if that turns around and we see a reduction in FDI, obviously that is a headwind for Mexican growth. I look at the equity story. I look at the companies that are on the equity market. And what you see is a lot of these companies have a foothold in the U.S. So these are companies that have operations in Mexico. A lot of them also have operations in the U.S., based in the U.S. So I think when we've looked at the equity story in Mexico, we've seen this big derating. A lot of the companies, there's opportunities there because they have this foothold in the U.S. and they're not just purely Mexican companies. So you see this very strong relationship and ties between Mexico and the U.S., not only on this nearshoring theme, but the companies that we see on the equity market in Mexico.
Which nation is most attractive for equity investment?
So, let's take U.S. aside, and I'll focus on Latin America. So if you look at Brazil, valuations are highly discounted. So we've seen a big derating, and that hasn't come back. You're seeing earnings growth that's actually pretty robust. You're seeing growth, GDP growth in Brazil. We just revised it from 2 to 3.4%. So you're seeing a very strong labor market, a strong consumer, and that's translating to strong earnings growth among the companies in Brazil. And a lot of these companies are not highly leveraged. They have very strong free cash flow yields, and they have very strong dividend yields. So if you look kind of on a story based on earnings growth and based on dividend yields, kind of a total return story, there's a lot of attractive opportunities in Brazil. So that's focused on Latin America, but obviously we're still very constructive on U.S. equities as well.
One more question. Are you modeling in dollar weakness now? I've got action out of China. I've got action out of Switzerland this morning. Can HSBC model in dollar weakness?
So our house call is we think that the dollar stays strong. I will say in these Latin American countries and in Brazil in particular, you have a central bank where we're increasing rates. So you had the Fed that cut by 50 basis points. You have the Brazil Central Bank that increased rates by 25 basis points with a hawkish message. So you'll see continued increase in rates. And keep in mind, rates in Brazil are already high. We're at a double-digit rate. So they'll stay at this high double-digit rate probably through to the end of next year. So, based on that, you'll probably see a strengthening of the Brazilian real against the U.S. dollar, but that's a very specific case. So, really our base case, our house call is for the dollar to stay strong.
Terrific briefing. Nicole Inouye, thank you so much for that look south of the border with the political ramifications as well. It's amazing, David Gura, how Mexico cuts both ways. There's a border, huge issue, immigration, legal, illegal immigration. And at the same time, they're a manufacturing depot for us and for China.
And something to watch, too. We talk a lot about our presidential election, of course, but in inauguration right around the corner in Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum set to be inaugurated there. And I think a lot of folks wondering how much continuity there'll be in governance as a result of that. So certainly something we should return to here in the weeks ahead.
Huge response yesterday to an appearance by Chris Whalen, writing clearly here on international and domestic banking. His tweet, this is just out moments ago, it's a Bloomberg headline: China to issue $284 billion US special sovereign bonds. This is the fiscal stimulus that's come on so quickly. Quote, like we said, China is in a financial crisis. And it seems, David, they're acting rapidly in Beijing.
Let's talk a bit about that rapidity. I mean, as you said in our interview at the top of the show, this is happening much faster, I think, than a lot of us expected. Do you sense panic coming out of that, or do you sense this happening in kind of a regulated, formalized way here by the PBSC?
It's formalized in that they're repeating history. I would defer to Overshell and other giants of China thinking. China Beige Book would be a great source here. I'm guessing they've got a labor issue, which we know they do, but it's worsening. And I really wonder about protest or potential protest that we don't hear about. And usually, to me, that's the catalyst. I'm as guilty of this as anyone. I go deep into China. Okay, the Mandarin Hotel in Hong Kong.
Yeah, very deep into China.
And Shanghai, I really busted. I go to the Peace Hotel on the Bund. And in Beijing, I'm in some hotel down the street from where Mao sat with Kissinger. Deep into China.
Yes.
And the answer is, if you go deep into China, like China pros, there's some real upset.
Absolutely. And housing, of course, a big issue. And so you look at all that we've seen released this week, again, starting with the monetary policy, the banking reserves rules that they've put into effect, and now the fiscal ones. A lot of change happening in reaction to the softening of that economy.
We look at economics, finance, investment, and lots of other issues this morning. All you need to know: West Texas Intermediate, $67.86, down 2.6%. Equities, bonds, currencies, commodities, they are on the move. Futures up 46. From New York City, David Gura and Tom Keene. Stay with us around the world, across this nation. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got a nice lift to the markets. This is ahead of more economic data out this morning. Today, we'll get a look into weekly jobless claims for last week, durable goods orders, and a third estimate of GDP for last quarter. Then tomorrow, the attention turns to personal income, spending trends, plus the Fed's preferred inflation gauge. So ahead of all this, we have NASDAQ futures up more than 1.5%, Dow futures up 0.4%, S&P futures up 0.8%. The two-year yield, 3.54%. That's down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 3.77%, and that's down 1 basis point. To currencies, we have the dollar weaker, Japanese yen stronger, we have euro stronger, British pound up 0.4% at 1.3379 against the dollar. Bitcoin up more than 1% at around 64,000. Shares of Swedish fashion retailer H&M down 4% in Europe. It said it would miss a key profitability target this year. Then you have Southwest Airlines. It authorized a new $2.5 billion stock buyback program. It's also raised its third quarter sales forecast. Their shares up about 4%. And finally, Pfizer down 0.3%. It announced that it's voluntarily withdrawing a sickle cell treatment from the markets 2 years after acquiring its developer. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and David.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Greatly appreciate it. The news flow is extraordinary. We could have Damian Sassari in for an hour this morning, but let's get to what matters right now. Is Dallas having their worst year ever?
Oh, really? We're going to talk about Giants Dallas. Okay.
Yeah,
I would say that Dak Prescott looks great out there, but the talent around him, specifically at offensive line, is what's holding them back. They can't establish the run. Their defense is a little bit soft.
So Giants have a legit shot tonight.
I wouldn't go that far. I still think the Cowboys are favored, but the Giants. Okay. I mean, look, they got their first win last weekend, and so you got to think they may have a chance.
We throw you out of the studio now, but instead there's some news flow we got to deal with. Damian Sassar here in China. In 48 hours, maybe 72, they announced fiscal stimulus. What does the recovery of China from fiscal stimulus mean for your world of EM?
Vows and pledges, Tom. They vow to stimulate fiscally. They pledge to do more. These are just promises. We've been waiting for promises for 4.5 years now. So, I'm not going to put all that much stock in it. But look, this was a sweeping range of monetary stimulus, reminiscent of the 2015 package that followed China's stock market crash. So, I mean, look, the stimulus is real. We cut the RRR, we cut the 7-day repo, we cut the 1-year medium-term lending facility, and we promised a macro stabilization fund and a swap facility that's going to allow, fund managers and insurers to borrow against their equity holdings, blah, 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 blah. But look, the market is divided on economic impact, and rightfully so, because to date, the slow execution at the local government level, putting the money to work, the fiscal spending's running way behind what's been budgeted in the plan. So I think this has more to do with project viability, return on investment, delays in fundraising, risk of leverage, all very real concerns.
Do either of you see any rekindling of foreign direct investment by the Western world into China? I don't see it.
No,
How do you run that model?
Well, I think that is a fundamental issue that has more to do with the fact that there's a lack of respect for property rights. And I think you see that just in the recent selling from some VC funds, some foreign investors. Yeah. Walmart's example sold their stake in JD.com a month ago. So, I just don't see the confidence that the corporate sector, that the government has your back as an investor, as a private investor.
Help me understand the magnitude of this moment. We had a lot of conversations about Fed communication over the course of the week, what was leaked to the FT, what was leaked to the Wall Street Journal, how the Fed is communicating about what it intends to do. Each central bank, of course, has its own flavor and policies, how it communicates. This is the PBOC, not one known for having a press conference today.
Opaque to say the least,
a lot of detail. But the way that this is unfolding strikes me as different. I wouldn't say maybe more transparent, but in how this is unfolding, what should we read into that, and what does that tell you about the magnitude, the importance of this moment?
I agree. What makes this time different, great observation, is the fact that all the stimulus is being delivered all at once and ahead of the national day. It's a week holiday coming up here, so a lot of spending, a lot of consumption is supposed to take place there. We'll see if that is delivered. But the other unusual point is the forward guidance here. The PBOC never gives you forward guidance, right? And Peng Gongsheng, the PBOC governor, said they're going to be cutting rates again before the end of this year and they're going to be doing more to help, facilitate mergers and acquisitions activity, capital markets activity, et cetera. You saw that China tapped the international capital markets here, today or yesterday. So, look, there's definitely a lot of activity there, and that is indeed what makes this time different. But I mean, again, this to me comes back to the fact that you've got youth unemployment running at 19% year over year. And, with the wealth destruction we've seen from the equity market, from the property market, people just don't have the willingness to spend on big ticket items.
Are they having the same tension along the Pacific Rim or in the Damien Sassari EM world to get to a bogey like 5%? Singapore sitting up at night after the F1, are they looking up at the stars in Singapore saying, how are we going to get to X% GDP?
It's funny. I mean, and this goes to what David was saying also, the speed with which they're announcing all this and trying to put it into action is really kind of unbelievable. And a lot of it reminds me of the way the country reacted in the wake of the pandemic, right? Oh, let's just rip the Band-Aid off and, no more pandemic. You can go back to work and go back to school, et cetera. And this seems a lot like, somebody telling Xi Jinping that they weren't going to make their 5% bogey. And so, Band-Aid comes off. I know it seems like that. I don't know if that's actually what's happening, at the Politburo, but it just feels like that. And look, this lying flat movement, the Tang Ping movement in China amongst millennials is real. There is no desire.
Explain that again.
The Tang Ping movement, it's lying flat, basically rejecting the pressure to overachieve. So, Chinese, millennials were always raised that marriage, children, home ownership, these are things you strive for. They're rejecting that. They're rejecting that, and they're rejecting.
Surveillance.
And what's interesting is they're rejecting, and team surveillance. They're rejecting the willingness to go out and get a job.
Exactly.
And what you've seen just announced in the last 24 hours is, I guess, Beijing going into more of a welfareism condition in the sense that they're going to provide Social Security to college graduates who haven't found a stable job after 2 years. So I mean,
what are you running for?
They're going
office?
Backwards. Who, me? No, I've just I've got a lot of information, and you call it catching me with a lot of coffee in my bloodstream at 7:36 in the morning. So
can you link Swiss franc dynamics?
Oh boy, here we go.
To China.
All right, let's
to
talk.
me, there's a little bit of butterfly stuff going on here.
Okay, so we just look at the performance on the back of what's happened here in China, and we see that those countries' currencies with the closest links to China, I'm talking Chile and South Africa, commodity exporters, I'm talking Malaysia, talking, they're all Singapore, they're all the big winners. They've been huge winners over the last 5 days, and I believe that'll continue. Australia, New Zealand, who, by the way, this is another thing, they just sailed some warships through the Taiwan Strait. That didn't leave Beijing too happy. Japan did that as well. Japan's spend on defense is like going to double in the next, 2 to 3 years. It's going to be a massive amount of money. Japan is not holding back, and the Taiwan Strait is real. And so, I think there's that going on. I think Xi Jinping and Biden are preparing for another phone call. Their relations have kind of smoothed over since Pelosi last visited Taiwan. So there's a lot of geopolitical undertone going on here ahead of the November elections. We're trying to stay busy here at Bloomberg Intelligence.
Damien's mellow here this morning. He's not even fired up.
The only relationship that has more buildup for a phone call is yours and mine. It takes a long time for us to get on the phone to talk things through. Damien, could things be worse than we think they are? And I want to ask you just about the integrity of the data. Our week began at the Plaza Hotel. I saw you there. Tom and I were there. And so many people were talking about the need for good data, the need to understand what data is telling you the truth versus falsehoods. Do we know? Do you have more confidence in the data that we're getting from the Chinese government, or could things be worse than we think they are?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I rely more on China Beige Book and some of the high-frequency data we see out of Taiwan and South Korea when I'm trying to really gauge what's going on, boots on the ground, or quite frankly, talking to my people who are in Beijing and Hong Kong who give me a real better sense of what's happening there. Stephen Chu, my chief Asia rates and FX strategist.
He's very good.
He's very good. Unbelievable. And
he works 5 days a week.
Yeah.
Watch yourself.
Watch yourself. Right, exactly. No, but honestly, guys, I mean, it just, the sentiment is so weak coming out of there. And I remember feeling much the same way here in the U.S. post-global financial crisis. Once that conditioning set in, it's really difficult to unwind. And I think China's going to have some struggles here.
Giants or Dallas, it's all I care about.
I'm a New Yorker, so I am going to be rooting for Big Blue. But, but the Cowboys are a tough squad, and they're going to bounce back, I imagine.
Damien Sassar, Bloomberg Business Sports, a side gig for him. And, of course, absolutely excellent on emerging markets, and they are emerging this morning. I can't say how original equities, bonds, currencies, commodities look on the screen. Damon, we got Bar in a poll. Okay,
Do you have all those currency pairs you mentioned on your worksheet, Tom?
I do.
WCR go on the
most of them. I
terminal.
got renminbi at 7.01. It did print a 6.99 for a cup of Tang. Tang is big in Shanghai, by the way. I don't know if you knew that.
Only
I got
at the Peace
Euro
Hotel with a little
Swissy.
bit
I
of
got Euro Swissy here, giving me a little bit stronger Euro, weaker Swissy off what SMB did. And, Russell, thank you so much. Out on live chat, this stimulus news in China has not been reported here. That's how fast the news flow is going, folks. We're working at global Bloomberg speed this morning, and you see it with futures up 47. With our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, David, Lisa. New York City Mayor Eric Adams has been indicted following a federal corruption investigation. Some Democrats are urging him to resign as he seeks re-election. However, Adams said that he would not resign as he denies the charges.
I always knew that if I stood my ground for all of you, that I would be a target. And a target I became. For months, leaks and rumors have been aimed at me in an attempt to undermine my credibility and paint me as guilty.
We'll learn more when the indictment will be unsealed, likely later today. This started as a campaign finance investigation, but has expanded in recent months with some top members of the administration resigning. Hurricane Helene continues to strengthen as it heads toward the Big Bend area of Florida's Gulf Coast. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says on top of the winds, forecasters say the storm surge threatens to be unsurvivable.
Remember, you hide from wind, but you run from the water.
Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolyn has more.
Helene continues to move off towards the north-northeast at 12 miles an hour. Maximum sustained winds have been increased to 90 miles an hour, and further strengthening is likely as Helene moves through the eastern Gulf of Mexico today over some very warm water. It could reach the Big Bend area of Florida this evening as a Category 4 hurricane with winds in excess of 120 miles an hour and a storm surge of anywhere from 15 to 20 feet. Now, since Helene will be accelerating during the day, we expect the strong winds to stay with the system as it moves inland over the eastern Florida panhandle and up into southern Georgia. Parts of the southeastern United States are not only at risk for heavy rain, but very strong winds later tonight and into tomorrow morning. I'm Rob Carolyn, Bloomberg Radio.
Thank you very much, Rob. Israel ordered the military to maintain its bombardment of Hezbollah targets in Lebanon and denied interest in a truce deal. It comes as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will address the United Nations General Assembly tomorrow in New York. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With the Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, David, Lisa.
And Michael Barr, thanks so much. David, we got to frame the data points here as we get to further news here in New York this morning on the indictment of Mayor Adams. I think we've got to stay on the story. Oil, Brent, 71.51. Global oil down down $2. NYMEX crude 67.72, and in the bond market, I got a lower yield regime. I'm not back to where we were with Jay Powell, but the fact is we got a lower bond regime this morning, lower yield.
Looking ahead to those comments from Fed Chair Jerome Powell a little later today, speaking at a Treasury conference, and I gather those remarks will be pre-taped and 10 minutes in length. And as we heard from our guest at the top of the show, unlikely to have a whole lot of information there, but people are still listening closely, scouring anything and everything from these Fed policymakers for some indication, Tom, of the path forward.
Yeah. Dollar churning, trying to go weaker. The DXY, the conventional index, 100.82. The Bloomberg Dollar Index is a much richer, statistically greater veracity series, 1221, but again indicating weaker dollar off what's called BBDXY. Euro yen is what you always look at on Global Wall Street, and that shows strengthening yen versus euro. Sterling, I think I may have to cancel my trip. It's just
alert Mrs. Keene to this news.
It's just we're just beyond the pale.
Is she keeping up with this news flow? I don't know.
She's got her phone hooked up. She's day trading sterling, trying to get some arbitrage.
The Keene carry trade.
I said, how do you arbitrage Fendi? I'm not quite sure how to do that, but we'll see. Bitcoin, let's get there, up $1,000, 64,400 on Bitcoin. We're on Apple CarPlay, we're on Android Auto, across the nation. Good morning on the quarter, 99.1 FM Washington. Our flagship, Bloomberg 1130 in New York, and 92.9 FM in Boston. Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got green on the screen ahead of more economic data and after China pledges fiscal stimulus. We also have more Fed speak on tap. Chair Jay Powell, John Williams, a ton of other policymakers expected to speak at the U.S. Treasury Market Conference today. So ahead of all this, NASDAQ futures up more than 1.5%. Dow futures up about 0.5%. S&P futures up about 0.7%. We have the two-year yield at 3.54%. That's down 2 basis points. A yield on the 10-year 3.77%. And that's down 1 basis point. To commodities right now, oil, Brent crude, $71 a barrel. WTI crude, $67 a barrel. We have silver surging to its highest level since 2012. And gold right now, spot gold at $2,684 an ounce. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and David.
Lisa, thanks so much. I'm looking at GCA, which is one of the indicators of gold off the Bloomberg. The future's 27.08. Up $23. That's a wow statistic. Lisa Mateo, thank you for that this morning. This is a 3-hour conversation we're going to cram into 3 minutes. We can do this with Miles Miller of Bloomberg. We're thrilled he could join us this morning. He's got a fancy title, managing editor. He's here because he's a former deputy press secretary of the FDNY. Miles, more than anyone I know, you've been in the milieu, the mix of city politics. You've actually lived it. What's the level of chaos this morning?
Well, a lot of chaos. One thing is, all last night, people who work in City Hall, people who work in city government, waking up or going to sleep saying, what will tomorrow bring? And that's the thing. There are movements. There are people who have already left city government, and I think there'll be more people who leave city government who join the Adams administration thinking that this would be an administration where they could actually do what he wants, which is get stuff done. And then this is now under the cloud of this indictment.
Completely unfair question, but it's Miles Miller, so we can go there. Is Mayor Adams lame duck at some point today?
It depends on what happens with the indictment and what is specifically...
What's in it.
What's in it, yes. Yeah.
Picking up on that, I'm sure you've watched the statement that he delivered last night, that brief video statement from Gracie Mansion, and he there is so adamant, saying effectively, I was elected to govern this city, I'm going to continue to do so. Is he going to be able to? How difficult has it been just in these recent weeks as he's seen a string of departures of kind of high-level aides and administrators from his mayoralty?
It'll be really difficult for him to continue, but you never count Eric Adams out. I've known Eric Adams for 18 years. So much so that I've called him E on his. I was there when he took the train to City Hall. He will continue to try to govern, but it's up to the governor, and if not the governor, the inability committee, which includes one of his top detractors, the comptroller, who can say, along with with the people on the committee, that he should not stay, and we'll see if that happens.
Comptroller, his now rival in this primary coming up as well. For Global Wall Street, what should they know about him and how he won this job back in 2021? This was an impressive, broad coalition that he managed to fashion together. What was it about him that resonated so widely in the 5 boroughs of the city?
This, of course, is a former captain in the NYPD, so he ran on a message of public safety. And really being able to drive out any issues with public safety. Appointed the first black female police commissioner, and then she resigned, and then put in Eddie Caban, who also has resigned, but he resigned under a spell of controversy.
And now the interim commissioner being investigated as well, or not investigated, but has had agents looking at his
right. He's got a case of maybe taking home some classified documents, and Eric Adams invoked him yesterday in his speech, which I thought was really interesting.
He's in charge of smart questions. I'm in charge of unfair questions. Moments ago, Matthew Haig of the New York Times, federal agents searched the official residence of Mayor Eric Adams this Thursday morning.
Yeah,
what are they looking for?
Yeah, we saw them go into Gracie Mansion in their Suburbans, as the FBI's want to do. They're going to look for more details about this case, the case that they're building. This is a case about foreign interference in this election, and so that is why they're there.
There was this moment a few months back when, an aide's electronic devices were taken by the FBI, and then quite extraordinarily, he's driving around Greenwich Village, and the FBI approaches him in his SUV, the mayor here, and takes his electronic devices as well. I keep going back to this phrase, this wasn't unexpected. And I wonder if you agree with that the level of scandal, the resignations, the investigations that we've seen seem to be mounting. How surprised were you? How surprised should people be that we've gotten to this point?
I think the surprise is that they went for Eric Adams
himself,
because it was initially with Rana Abasova, the woman who had the connection to the Turkish government. But they found that he was having. They found that he was involved.
And she's now cooperating, right?
She's cooperating, and we'll see if she gets charged in this as well.
We're with Miles Miller, our managing editor of Bloomberg Television, with encyclopedic knowledge of the city. Patricia Hurtado following this story as well. Truly iconic in the legal processes of New York City. We welcome you across the nation and around the world on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. We in New York City focused on these events after the hectic midweek of the UN General Assembly meetings. We continue with Miles Miller. I wanted the police and the fire department, they got to be running normal. But above that level, what's the energy like? You've lived this hour by hour on other ugly days. What are the people above the line troops of the fire department and the police, NYPD, what are they doing this morning?
Well, they've got to figure out who is their commander, right? Mayor Adams came in with a mandate that he was a general and he was leading his troops. And so they're wondering, what does this mean about our commissioner? What does this mean about promotions? What does this mean for us? So city operations will continue. And there is obviously a line of secession if he is to step down. But for the people, the day-to-day people who work in city government, their worries are, what does this mean for me? And will I continue to work in the ways that, like cops, can I continue to drive down crime? Will we still have the support of whomever is in office, or will we still have the support of the mayor if he's facing these charges? We were talking a little while back just about what recourse the governor might have here, Kathy Hochul might have, and so baked into her responsibilities is the ability to suspend the mayor if he's charged like this, and perhaps remove him. What can you tell us about the relationship between these two individuals, between Kathy Hochul and the mayor of New York City? They have forged quite a relationship. It's not particularly close, but it's very cordial. Definitely different from Bill de Blasio and of course, Andrew Cuomo. But these two have worked, in lockstep. And so it'll be interesting to see if the statement she released was from her press secretary was 26 words long.
Who's counting?
So, yeah.
You mentioned Andrew Cuomo. Should we be thinking a lot about Andrew Cuomo at this moment in time?
I have still wondered if that is more just him getting his name out. But now that this is happening, could that happen?
If there were to be a special election.
Yeah. From your office, you should see his office here, folks, at Bloomberg. It's
nobody has an office here.
With four you figured that out. With four Bloombergs, Miles Miller, thank you so much. Stand up and come over to radio when there's some news today. We need to get rebriefed by Miles Miller. That will be important. We thank all of you worldwide with the news flow. Futures up 44, Dow futures up 178, the VIX 15.22. Markets on the move. Somebody out on live chat YouTube just highlighted oil. Wow, $67.62, down 3% on American West Texas Intermediate. That speaks volumes. Key economic data today, that inflation report tomorrow. Bloomberg Surveillance, always brought to you by IBKR Financial Advisors. Switch to Interactive Brokers for lowest cost. Global trading, turnkey custody solutions. There are no ticket charges. There are no conflicts of your interests. Do that at ibkr.com/RIA. ibkr.com/RIA. Wow, was that
hugely
a conversation,
valuable.
David?
Yeah. Again, we're looking forward to this unsealing happening later today. I don't think we have any indication of timing of that yet. But I'm also thinking here just about the business of that office. The U.S. Attorney for the Southern District, Damian Williams, now helming that. And, of course, that was the office that oversaw the prosecution of Senator Menendez in New Jersey as well. So the lawyers tied to public corruption in that office working overtime.
And these guys are full-time. This is not like they're flying them in.
That's right.
I mean, this is like, there'll be a lot more on this. Stay with us today on Bloomberg Radio for these events in New York City and the huge news flow around the world. Brenda Russell, a classic. Good morning.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation's still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. Lisa Mateo here with huge data checks. Futures up 44. Dow futures were up 200, now up 168. The VIX 15.23. The news flow this morning is extraordinary. There's news flow in New York City. We thank you, Miles Miller. We just covered that there. What we haven't touched upon, David Gura, away from equities, bonds, currencies, commodities, is two candidates running for president. And we're within 40 days of the election, right?
Here we are, and we've had both candidates give big speeches on the economy this week, and Vice President Harris is making her way to the U.S.-Mexico border today. So I think both of these candidates got the message from that last round of polling that what the electorate really cares about is the economy and immigration, and they have focused and tailored their messaging on that to that this week.
What's the magic Steph Rule has that we don't have? We've been efforting Vice President Harris. I said to the Vice President's team, I said, we can get Gura to talk to you. What does Steph Rule over at MSNBC have that we don't have?
I watched her interview in full, sort of complimenting the speech that Vice President Harris gave in Pittsburgh yesterday, and I say that she's sort of getting the message about what that polling is telling her. Part of that, of course, as we've talked about, is this hunger among voters to hear more from the Vice President about who she is and what she wants to do. I think that was what happened yesterday in that interview, her awareness of the fact that she probably does need to do more conversations like that.
Okay, but did Steph get her to move to the middle? That's all that anybody wants to know.
She, I think, moved to the middle and talked a lot about the middle class, which is something that Donald Trump did not do in his speech. So I think that's her primary point of differentiation with the former president.
Your electoral update with David Gura. Thank you for that. We'll continue with this coverage. And, of course, coming up on the October 1st debate, Balance of Power will give you some great conversational perspective on that. Bloomberg surveillance this morning, unbelievable news flow. And we thank the support of Cohn Resnick. Advisory Assurance Tax, discover optimization strategies that are helping CFOs make their financial function more competitive and more resilient. Talk to Cohn Resnick's advisors. We thank Cohn Resnick for their support. From the Interactive Broker Studios, Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
And we've got futures advancing, tracking gains in Asia after China pledges fiscal stimulus. Stocks in China, Hong Kong rose more than 4%. Tech shares climbing. NASDAQ futures up nearly 1.5%. We have Dow futures up about 0.3% at 42,437. S&P futures up 0.7% at 5,821. Checking in with Micron because that's giving a good lift to those tech stocks right now, up about 16%. Gave a strong revenue forecast from AI demand. Then we check in with other chip players. NVIDIA up more than 2%. ASML, ADR's up more than 4%. Advanced Micro Devices, AMD up 2%. S&P futures, where you hit those, we'll head over to the bond market. 2-year yield 3.54%. That's down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 3.77%, and that's down 1 basis point. Few companies making news. OpenAI. Sources saying Sam Altman may become $10 billion richer. That's through OpenAI's for-profit move, which could give him a 7% stake. And layoffs coming to Disney's corporate level. It's part of an ongoing effort to improve profitability. Deadline reporting about 300 jobs will be affected. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and David.
Lisa, thanks so much. It is one of the most coveted research notes on Wall Street. We protect the copyright of all our guests. Go to DataTrek Research to get the wisdom of Nick Colas. We're thrilled he could join us this morning. Nick, I like what you say in paragraph 4. You've got a gross polarity between NASDAQ 100 melt up, right now up 1.4% this morning, and gold on GCA printing 27.05. How can gold be so different from NASDAQ 100?
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic. We kind of think of gold as a static but valuable asset, and the NASDAQ is the value of human ingenuity. And what's interesting is they're both kind of working right now, and usually it's one or the other. and we're getting both at the same time for different reasons. The NASDAQ, because human ingenuity is working, the AI thing works, and chip stocks are the center of it right now. And gold is working because central banks around the world view it as a viable alternative to buying sovereign debt in terms of holding incremental reserve value. So you got both working, but it is very strange.
You are going to write this morning on China going from monetary to fiscal stimulus in what's 3 days, 72 hours? I flunked that. In 72 hours, Nicholas, how do you fold China into the American equity market?
Ooh, that is a great question.
It's my only good one, so I'm going home.
I was just looking at the 5-year chart of MCHI, the MSCI China ETF, and I'd say anybody who's in front of a terminal should do that right now, because MCHI is trading below where it was 5 years ago by a considerable margin. So people keep looking for this China trade to finally catch up. Maybe this is the stimulus that begins to get us there. We're pretty skeptical at DataTrek, but I understand why people would want to believe so.
Where are we in the announcement of these monetary and fiscal policies? I think Tom and I both kind of godsmacked by how quickly this has been unrolled by the Chinese government. Are we at a point at which this seems like something that is remotely investable, or is there still a moment here to kind of pause and wait to see what else might be coming from Beijing?
The central issue with any of these attempts over the last couple of years by the Chinese government is you have a series of monetary and fiscal policy actions, but then you have this very different perspective from government regulators where, yes, they want the economy to improve, but they don't want to give too much power back to the very wealthy or to the corporations. And that tension has been really damaging for Chinese equity market investor sentiment. And until you see the other side of the coin also begin to maybe take its finger off the scale a little bit, it's going to be tough to bet too much on this turn. But certainly you're right that these steps have been very dramatic, very impressive.
Michael Mauboussin was with us yesterday, and we talked about this moment for small cap stocks. We talked a lot about sort of the Magnificent Seven and the run that they've had, the level of concentration that we've been experiencing over these last many months. I'd love your perspective on that as well, sort of how much opportunity there is, how much emphasis we should place on small cap companies.
Yeah, Mike's a great guy. I worked with him all through the 1990s at the old First Boston, so I have a lot of respect for him. My view on small caps is you need the stars to align pretty precisely to get the Russell to work really well. And we've seen that twice now, just in the last 3 or 4 months. You had that big rip in July, and then they fell apart again. And you're beginning to get that rip again now, but it's much more tentative. And what you need to see is a combination of lower interest rates, lower high yield spreads, and a lot of investor confidence in the U.S. economy. And as great as it is to see the chip stops working again, it kind of tells me that the small caps are going to be on the back bench until we kind of hit maximum investor enthusiasm towards the end of the fourth quarter.
Nick, we're on a streak here. We had Michael Mauboussin yesterday, as David Gura mentions, iconic Credit Suisse leg Mason onto Morgan Stanley. We have Nick Colas today. I mean, you can't do better than that. And tomorrow, folks, scheduled Nicholas Nassim Taleb, who changed the world with Fooled by Randomness. Nick, I want to go to Taleb's wonderful effort, Anti-Fragile, Anti-Fragility, a property of systems in which they increase in capability to the result of stressors, shocks, volatility, noise, and UNC football. Is America prospering, Nick Colas, because we have Talebian anti-fragility where we're not afraid of stressors and shocks and mistakes?
I think that America by nature is psychologically anti-fragile. Americans are very optimistic people. They don't worry about making mistakes, and they don't criticize people that fail, at least in business. There are always second and third acts in American society, and I think by nature we are anti-fragile. The systems we create might not be, but I think our psychology is deeply in that direction.
And I don't see that in China. Discuss. Do you see any of that? In Foreign Affairs magazine, a brilliant essay here, Ruchir Sharma writing it up, and others about a Marxist-Leninist regime. I mean, that's Friedberg at Georgetown, I believe, writing on that. Does China have any anti-fragility?
Certainly not to the degree the U.S. does. And I think the U.S. is unique literally around the world. We talk about American exceptionalism as a concept. This is where America is exceptional. Our ability to keep bouncing back from mistakes, try again, until we get something right, whether it be in business or politics or anything else. And I think it's unique to our culture.
Nick Colas, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated with DataTrek. This morning, I got goosebumps. I got ducky bumps. I mean, we got Mobus Colas, Taleb, and Michael Barr.
Yeah,
all four of
Michael
them.
Barr.
It's just
Which one
too
now?
much.
The smart one or
In
me?
no particular order.
It's just too much. Nick Colas, thank you so much. Nassim Taleb for an extended conversation in 9 o'clock hour tomorrow. Futures up 41. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, David, Lisa. New York City Mayor Eric Adams has been indicted by a federal grand jury on criminal charges that are still sealed. Adams said after the indictment that he would not resign.
It is now my belief that the federal government intends to charge me with crimes. If so, these charges will be entirely false, based on lies.
Bloomberg's John Tucker has more on this story.
Michael, the New York Times is reporting federal agents this morning swept in to search Gracie Mansion, of course, the official residence of Mayor Adams. The search of Gracie Mansion on the Upper East Side, it started around 6 a.m. The Times reports a group of roughly a dozen men and women in business attire arrived outside the entrance in SUVs, at least one of which had a federal law enforcement parking placard. Several carried briefcases, backpacks, or duffel bags as they entered the grounds. It's a pretty stunning and aggressive move right now by the feds. Michael.
Thank you very much, Bloomberg's John Tucker. Adams, a Democrat, won election nearly 3 years ago to become the second black mayor of the nation's largest city. Helene is now a Category 2 hurricane and is gaining more strength as it churns toward the Florida Panhandle. The storm had already prompted many residents from 20 counties in Florida to evacuate, schools to close, and officials to declare emergencies in both Florida and Georgia ahead of its landfall tonight. This Tallahassee resident decided to evacuate at the last minute.
I hope when we come back, our house is still the same as it was, as we left it. But not really nervous, just being cautious of what's going on around us.
Forecasters say storm surges could reach 20 feet in the state's northwest. The Israeli Prime Minister appears to be downplaying hopes of an imminent truce with Hezbollah. It comes after the U.S. and its allies called for an immediate 21-day ceasefire to provide space for diplomacy. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, David, Lisa.
And Michael Barr, thanks so much. There's a cadence in each and every city and town you're listening to across this nation. And there's a news flow, and we're all wired up in the Bloomberg terminal, and we get headlines before anybody else and all that. But David Gura, there's just a September cadence to the UN meetings. I believe Zelensky's speaking today of Ukraine.
He spoke yesterday, so he's actually making his way to Washington. He spoke briefly with President Biden on the sidelines of those meetings yesterday, but he'll be at the White House today unveiling his victory plan, as he calls it, to President Biden, asking for more support and also some more clarity on joining NATO.
These UN meetings with selected conflicts, including the immediacy of Lebanon. Thank you, Jumana Bersachi, for the wonderful reporting from Dubai. And then all of this indictment discussion of New York City politics. This is the most non-normal September I've ever seen in our zip codes.
You know, there was some uncertainty around whether the Prime Minister of Israel would come to New York to address the UN. In fact, Benjamin Netanyahu is doing that. I gather he's going to speak tomorrow before the UN. So a hugely anticipated speech, and somebody who has been called out by name by other speakers at the UN.
We will focus on economics, finance, and investment as well. In 15 minutes, a redo of GDP, always important. Into tomorrow's key inflation data. Sandwiched in the middle, maybe claims will give us some information. Bloomberg surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Well, after taking a breather, stocks looking up again. Right now, we have tech leading the gains, up more than 1%. We have Dow futures up 0.3%. S&P futures up about 0.7%. We have the two-year yield 3.54%. That's up 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 3.76%, and that's down 2 basis points. Stocks in China, Hong Kong rose more than 4%. This is after Beijing pledges stronger policy support for the economy. I have to point out commodities. Oil falling for a second day. The prospect of higher supplies from Saudi Arabia. We have Brent crude $71 a barrel. WTI crude $67 a barrel. Then you have expectations additional interest rate cuts from the Fed giving a boost to precious metals. Silver surges to its highest level since 2012. We'll check in with gold. We have spot gold higher at $2,675 an ounce. To earnings, CarMax better than expected second quarter results sales, but its auto finance income that dropped more than 14% year over year. Its shares are down about 5%. And shares of IT services company Accenture up 4%, beat earnings estimates, raised its dividend. After the close, we move on to Costco. For more on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and David.
Lisa, thanks so much. David Gura, Tom Keene here, Bloomberg Surveillance this morning. People say, where did I come from? And just to focus on it, my grandmother was one of 11 children, and only 3 made it to age 21. And this was on the fields of Ohio. And so I want to make a correction off of Friday, Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney holding court, where we spoke with Professor Schiller of Brown University about Springfield. And there can be a confusion, as there always is and was in my childhood, about the news out of Springfield, Ohio, versus the iconic house sitting in Springfield, Illinois. And before the interstates, David, I drove with 4 screaming kids and no air conditioning, Ohio 40, over to Illinois 36 as you went 500 miles. It took forever, 5 hours or whatever, 300 miles, from Springfield, Illinois, over to Springfield, Ohio, over to Springfield, Illinois. Again, Springfield, Ohio is where we're having these sadnesses of presidential monologue. Professor Schiller joins us of Brown University. Let's go right there, Professor Schiller. In your world acclaimed, I put you and Beschloss together, Dresner as well. There is that house in Springfield, Illinois, where Abe lived. Would anybody in the Republican Party right now supporting Mr. Trump understand what Abe Lincoln wrought out of that house in Springfield, Illinois?
Well, and that was my mistake, and I apologize. I did go to college in Illinois, in Chicago, and I always thought politics, Chicago, Springfield in those days, Governor Big Jim Thompson. It was my bad, and I apologize for that mix-up. So I would say, Abraham Lincoln delivers one of his most famous speeches before becoming president. Tom, you know it well, and David probably knows it as well. A house divided cannot stand. And even though that was about slavery, and it was a political strategy memo, really, to the party, saying either we get our act together, and if we do, here's the coalition that we can build and we can win, taking an anti-slavery position. This is a house divided in some ways, and how divided it is, we're not going to know really until we see whether Trump wins or loses, because we have a portion of the Republican Party, a very small slice of those voters, did not vote for Donald Trump in 2020. They voted for House Republicans and Senate Republicans, but not at the presidential level. Do they go back to Donald Trump this time? Because this time it really appears as if he needs them.
I'm glad you bring this up, and I've spent a lot of time over these last couple of days listening closely to both the former president and the current vice president as they talk about the economy. And there was a moment that stood out to me in the speech that Donald Trump gave in Savannah, Georgia, in which he said, we're all Republicans, we're conservative and whatever, but we're really about common sense. And to me, that kind of throwaway line about conservatism stood out. His sense of what the Republican Party is and stands for today. And I would love to just get your insight into how you would define it today. I know there are a lot of people who see it as tied completely to Donald Trump, that there's this new brand of republicanism. What does that term mean today? What does a remark like that, offhand as it might have been, mean as we try to define and pin down what republicanism is today?
Well, I mean, I think republicanism, there are strains of the Republican Party platform today that strongly resemble going all the way back to Reagan and certainly Newt Gingrich, Trent Lott, who were firebrands in their day. But the theme of smaller federal government, lower taxes, don't give money to people who are quote unquote undeserving, because that's been a theme for a very long time. And they win elections on these themes. So this is the grounding of the party. And I don't see a lot of daylight. What's happening now is that on social and cultural issues, where the Republicans were interventionist under Reagan, trying to be anyway, but kind of backed off in the Bush era, Bush 1 and Bush 2, but really came back with a vengeance. You know, growing out of the Tea Party fiscal constraint came a lot of sort of moral intervention. This is a good, this is a bad, and the party got consumed by that. And Trump rode the wave of economic dissatisfaction, the theme of smaller federal government, and also piggybacked on these efforts that turn out the vote to overturn Roe v. Wade on abortion, against transgen, for example, and now anti-immigrant sentiment. So I don't see in the fundamentals a lot of shift in the Republican Party. You know, the voting records on these issues are the same. It's just that they ventured into territory now that they stayed away from and won presidencies by staying away from them in the past couple of decades.
Professor Schiller, I printed out the 82-page policy document that the Harris campaign released yesterday on the economy. And it made me wonder, since there's no complementary version from the other campaign, is this a policy election? She had been, the vice president, chided so much for not having more concrete policy, not having a document like that could be talked about. A bit of a double standard there. I don't think people are making the same case against the former president. Is she trying to make this about policy? Is she simply checking a box here as the campaign continues? How much is policy itself going to matter as we approach November?
Well, I mean, I think the general sense from some of the internal and external polling is that people who don't want to vote for Donald Trump aren't quite there yet for affirmatively going out the door and voting for Kamala Harris and saying, I don't know what she stands for. I don't know what she'll do. I don't know what kind of president she'll be. What will she do? She remains too amorphous, too undefined for the voters that are disenchanted with Trump. And in order to beat Trump, the Democrats have to get some slice of those people to get out the door and vote for her. And that's, I think, why they're delivering now more specifics. The Democrats do love their memos, long ones.
Wendy, I want to squeeze this in. March 31, 1976, Ronald Reagan announces a clarion call against Gerald Ford in his speech to restore America. Can these two candidates deliver a to restore America speech?
Well, I don't think Donald Trump can. I think he tried to harken back to a day when people want to return, but of course that day disenfranchised lots of people from civic and economic and social participation. So I don't think America wants to go back there. And Kamala Harris is trying to do that, Tom. She's trying to say, listen, I want a new kind of America in the sense that I want to return to tolerance and kindness and joy. And I think that's fine to get people interested in listening to what you have to say. Right. But people want to know what you're going to do about housing, taxes, the economy, and their kids' education. And I think that's where the Democrats typically have more detail, and that's where she's got to fill in the blanks.
Wendy Schiller, Brown University, thank you so much. Great commitment to Bloomberg surveillance. Greatly appreciate it. We'll talk again as well. Futures up 47. Dow futures were up 200, now up 177. The VIX stasis 15.2, so right on the edge of a screaming bull market. A way big headline today. I got gold over 2,700 on GCA. That's one measurement, different than spot gold London. NYMEX crude 67.80 as well, but we are distracted. When do you unseal an indictment, David Gura? Is there like, you get out of breakfast and you get Starbucks and seriously, is it 10ish? Is it noonish? Is it 4 p.m.?
We don't know.
We don't know.
But it'll be before 5. I think the court closes at 5 downtown on Pearl Street. So we'll know something before then, but we don't have a specific time yet. But we're hungry for detail on what that charge or charges are.
Yeah, we'll have to see. We're continuing to cover this. Miles Miller leading our coverage here at Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television. Michael Barr with his coverage, aggregating in all the news sources as well. Futures up 47. Again, yields are in with some global slowdown feel. 30-year bond, 4.11%. Gura house hunting this weekend, trying to get the mortgage under 6%. Bloomberg's surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We have a nice lift to the markets. This is ahead of more economic data coming out just moments away from weekly jobless claims last week, a third estimate of GDP for last quarter, also durable goods orders for August. So ahead of all this, we'll check in with the markets. NASDAQ futures up about 1.5% at 20,503. We have Dow futures up 0.4%. S&P futures up 0.8%. Okay, I see the numbers starting to come in. We have GDP second quarter. The survey was for 2.9%, coming in at 3.0%. That's right on target with the prior. We have personal consumption. That was 2.9%. The survey coming in at 2.8%. The survey last prior was 2.9%. Want to head down to durable goods orders for August. The survey was for negative 2.6%. Right now, that's coming in at a straight zero. The prior was for 9.8%. And we have to hit initial jobless claims for last week. The survey was for 223,000, coming in at 218,000. The prior 219, and that was revised up to 222,000. So a lot of data coming in. Tomorrow, that attention turns to data on personal income, spending trends, plus the Fed's preferred inflation gauge. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. A lot going on. Tom and David.
To say the least. Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. You know, you think we're so smart. We're not, folks. Mostly what we do is look at the famed Bloomberg launchpad across equities, bonds, currencies, commodities, and we just look blinky. How much does it light up?
I haven't been here in a while for a moment like this, but it is a moment. 8:30 a.m.
It is a moment.
Populates.
We got revisions. Very importantly, claims do not revise much higher, 219 to 222. And the statistic this morning of weekly claims is at 218. You've got a 4-week moving average of initial claims that's just not giving you a moldy job economy. Pushing against that with a 2.9% GDP survey. We come in at 3.0. Good morning to the Goldman Sachs Hotsiest team on that. They've been beating the drum on. Excuse me, better than good GDP pending home sales coming up in the David Gura hour at 10 o'clock as well. Our economic data, always led by Michael McKee, brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with a 2-to-1 advisor to staff ratio, small firm attentiveness, big advisor impact. Go to commonwealth.com to learn about our consultative support and technology. Thank you, Commonwealth, for a backbone of this show and what we do here, particularly on economic data. Futures pretty much on up 44. All of this off China news, Swiss franc news, a little bit of Germany, soggy news as well. The VIX 15.24. We need a brief. Eric Winograd joins Chief Economist, Alliance Bernstein. Eric, how do you go from what Greenspan would call a quiescent claims out to a troubled job market? How do you get there?
Well, look, I think you have to see a change in the environment. You have to see actual layoffs, and we're not seeing that across the economy at this stage. You know, there's been a lot of focus on the rise in the unemployment rate. That's because there have been more workers available, not because people are losing their jobs. And so we're not seeing the sort of spiral that Greenspan was talking about and that you referenced.
Do we have an immigration, a technology, a productivity overlay that makes us not understand our labor economy?
I mean, I think so far and over the last couple of years, it's been largely an immigration story. We've had a positive supply shock to the economy. More workers are available. You remember when we spoke a couple of years ago, the story was all about labor shortages. That is no longer the case. And the flow of people across borders has been very positive for the labor market and for the economic outlook. There's data and evidence suggesting that has slowed this year, and so we may not get quite that positive boost going forward. But it is possible that technology will lead to a productivity boost that will keep things going beyond that. It's a big part of the reason that we still expect the landing to be pretty soft.
The anxiety at the Fed, I think it's fair to say, about the labor market is palpable. And when Fed Chair Jerome Powell is looking at his dashboard, indeed, when you're looking at yours, what are the sort of pressure points? What are the things that would give particular concern when it comes to the health of the job market?
So honestly, the thing that people would focus on the most is the unemployment rate, which, as I think is fairly clear at this point, is sending a distorted signal, right? Because you only count as unemployed if you're not looking for, or if you're looking for work. The labor supply story matters there too. That said, you have seen a slowdown in the rate of hiring, and we expect that to continue with the payrolls number next week. Once hiring slows, the concern is that then it starts to transition away from slower hiring and into actual layoffs. The number of job openings has also declined. So you have this tension between the trajectory, which is clearly toward a weaker labor market, but the level, which is still strong. And I view the Fed as not necessarily anxious, but trying to inject some preventative medicine, if you will. The rate cut that they did last month and the ones that will come are to prevent that sort of negative outcome rather than having to address it. It's a lot easier to prevent something bad from happening than it is to fix it once it started to happen.
Eric, I've been on flights marked by turbulence. I'm sure you have been as well. And when the plane lands, there's applause from the passengers. There will be no declaration of victory here by the Fed, no applause from all of us when this is said and done. But I look at the other side of the mandate. I look at inflation. We're looking ahead to these PCE numbers tomorrow, and I wonder, how much do they matter in this new chapter as we've turned the page last week, focusing more on the labor market, beginning this rate cutting cycle? How much are these PCE data going to matter to the Fed and to all of us broadly as we move ahead?
Yeah, you're right. The Fed never gets applause, right? No one ever cheers when a central bank does a good job. It's the nature of the beast. The Fed is a convenient punching bag for whatever economic ill you are feeling. That said, I do think that they deserve a lot of credit, and the inflation numbers that are coming out tomorrow, as well as the ones that have come out over the summer and the ones that we expect going forward, suggest that they have done a good job of bringing inflation back under control. And as a result of that, you're right, it isn't as important going forward as it has been. The focus now is on the other side of the mandate, on the labor market side, rather than on the inflation side. And that's good news, right? That is supportive of financial markets because it means that if things deteriorate, the Fed is in a position to respond. That wasn't the case when inflation was the focus.
Eric, I got to do an audible here. The fact is you're out of one of the most acclaimed Asian study programs in America. What they've done at Dartmouth over decades on Asian studies, folks, is truly extraordinary. There's a terse essay in Foreign Affairs about President Xi and about just a continuation of his romance back to Mao. Is that breaking right now? I don't want to get you in trouble here with Alliance Bernstein, but do you see a breaking of the assumptive ties of Xi back to Mao that we've assumed for 3, 4, and 5 years?
So I was in China a couple weeks ago, and I don't know that the long-term outlook for policy or the way that Xi thinks about the world has changed. I don't know that his focus has broken, but it is clear that there is tension there. The economy is weak, and as we've seen from the efforts that policymakers are enacting over the course of this week, they have to respond to that. Does that change their long-term philosophy? I think probably not, but it is a challenge to manage through because if you want to maintain the trajectory that they were on in terms of consolidating power within the state, in terms of the role that the government plays in the economy, you still have to provide an outcome that allows people to get by, that encourages people to allow for social stability. And so, it was interesting being in China for the first time in several years. You could palpably feel how weak the economy was, but there was no evidence of social instability. And as long as that's the case, I don't think that the long-term policy path, the long-term social path, the long-term policy trajectory or philosophy is likely to change. When you are not subject to the democratic process as a leader, you can take a much longer view. And I think that that's what they're doing.
David, get one more in here.
I'm so curious just to hear more about that trip. And we were talking with Damian Sassower just a few moments ago, our colleague here at Bloomberg, about how he keeps abreast of what's happening in China, what data he thinks are valuable and not. On a trip like that, again, bearing in mind that you haven't been there in a while, how do you get the lay of the land? What is paramount to you as you talk to officials there, talk to economists, get a sense of sort of how the economy is doing? I think my surprise this week continues to be at how quickly all of this is unfolding, both the fiscal and the monetary stimulus. What insight did you get into sort of the backdrop to all of that from your trip to China recently?
So I think you have to recognize when you visit China as an American, you're probably not seeing a representative sample of the country. And so that does make talking to people there and getting the insight of people in the economy much more valuable. We have an office there, which has been really, really valuable for us in terms of gaining local knowledge and local insight. It really, I think, gives us an advantage in assessing the economy. But when we meet with policymakers, what you really want to get a sense of, I think, is their sense of urgency. Right? The data are what they are, but getting a sense of how policymakers perceive the world, what their questions of you are, because policymakers typically won't tell you exactly what they're thinking. That's true in the U.S. as well, by the way. But the questions that they ask and the general tenor of that discussion, the body language, if you will, I think can be very valuable in getting a sense of what policymakers are likely to do. They're not going to tell you we're going to do X on a particular day, but you can get a sense of if something is coming based on the sense of urgency that they feel or don't. And so that really is what I try to focus on.
Hugely valuable. Eric Winograd, AllianceBernstein, thank you so much, and particularly his personal perspective on China, which is the story of the day. You see it with the Dow up 200 points, futures 42,400, almost 42,500. S&P futures up 45. This after economic data that I think was pretty much stasis. GDP 3%. It's a terrible economy. Take real GDP 3% plus some form of 2.x% price index, and I'm sorry, you're out over 5% nominal GDP. And it's, I don't know what to make of it. All I know is every morning I wake up and China's giving me a story 3 days in a row.
Yes, fueling the show.
I looked at a blend of the luxury stocks out of Paris, which are hugely dependent on China. And just as a general statement, they're up 10, 11, 12% in 3 days.
The bills at home up 10 or 11% as well for some luxury.
We're celebrating. But the answer is, this China news, folks, it really folds right in to your retirement. Let's get to it quickly with our news in New York City. Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. David Lisa, New York City Mayor Eric Adams has been indicted by a federal grand jury on criminal charges that are still sealed. A defiant Adams said after the indictment that he would not resign.
Enough. I will fight these injustices with every ounce of my strength and my spirit. If I'm charged, I know I am innocent. I will request an immediate trials so the New Yorkers can hear the truth.
Bloomberg's Miles Miller, managing editor for Bloomberg Television.
What we know is that this investigation focuses on foreign interference in our local election, in the election of Mayor Eric Adams. And the focus by prosecutors was to see if any foreign donations had been funneled to the campaign improperly and illegally.
Bloomberg's Miles Miller says the indictment will be unsealed later today. Meanwhile, federal agents have searched Gracie Mansion, the mayor's official residence, around dawn. A fast-moving hurricane Helene is advancing across the Gulf of Mexico toward Florida. Forecasters say it threatens an unsurvivable storm surge in parts of northwestern Florida, as well as damaging winds, rain, and flash floods. This Crawfordville resident was busy Wednesday boarding up his windows.
I needed to board them up because they will not withstand 110-mile-an-hour winds.
Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolyn has the latest on the now Category 2 hurricane.
Helene continues to move off towards the northeast at 12 miles an hour in the eastern Gulf of Mexico. Maximum sustained winds have strengthened to 100 miles an hour. System is going to be making landfall later this evening, late tonight over the Florida Big Bend area with a storm surge of at least 15 to 20 feet and the potential for sustained winds over 120 miles an hour.
Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolyn. The Senate passed the 3-month stopgap government funding bill in a 78-18 vote, averting a government shutdown. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, David, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Bloomberg Surveillance, we're brought to you by, always, Interactive Brokers. Trade over 10,000 U.S. stocks and ETFs, U.S. equity index options, U.S. treasuries, and more on your timetable. Learn more at ibkr.com/around-the-clock. ibkr.com/around-the-clock. And we thank IBKR for their support. The market's extraordinary. I'm leading with oil, 68.12. On West Texas Brent, 71.87. Futures up 48. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got green on the screen after more economic data, which showed the economy grew faster than expected in the second quarter. Durable goods orders unchanged. Initial jobless claims dropped to a 4-month low. Applications decreased by 4,000 to 218,000 last week. Continuing claims, those ticked higher. More Fed speak on tap. We have Chair Jay Powell, John Williams, a ton of other policymakers expected to speak. That's at the U.S. Treasury Market Conference today. So we have NASDAQ futures up 1.5%. Dow futures up 0.4% at 42,476. We have S&P futures up 0.8% at 5,825. The 2-year yield 3.58%. That's up 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 3.79%, and that is little change. To commodities, oil lower. Brent crude $71 a barrel. WTI crude $68 a barrel. Silver surging to its highest level since 2012, and we have gold, spot gold at $2,676 an ounce. Shares of Commerce Bank up 6% in Germany. It raised its profitability targets. It contends with a possible takeover bid from Italian rival Unicredit. And Commerce Bank's incoming CEO, well, she says she'll meet with Unicredit tomorrow. Unicredit up about 4%. And finally, Meta Platforms up more than 1.5%. Positive feedback from analysts at its Connect conference showcased its AI progress and also those augmented reality glasses. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and David.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Greatly appreciate it. This is a real privilege, and we address all of you listening in Europe in your late afternoon as well. What Stavridis would say, David Gura, is, Tom, you got to get out the map first. That's what Admiral Stavridis would say. We know where Romania is, and of course, on the Black Sea, the edge of the Black Sea, and then up to all the tensions of Odessa and Ukraine, and of course over to Crimea as well. Sandwiched in between Romania and Ukraine, in a political crucible, there's no other way to put it, is a nation of Moldova. For Bloomberg, we get a brief now from Mihail Popsoy, Moldova's Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs as well. On a day-to-day basis, how is Moldova dealing with the protracted war in Ukraine?
Well, sadly, Moldova is the most affected country by the war in Ukraine, other than Ukraine itself, of course. But despite this enormous struggle and challenge, Moldova now is more resilient than 2-3 years ago. Thanks to the resilience of our society and the support of our international partners, Moldova has diversified its energy supply. Moldova is consolidating its democratic institutions. Moldova is building a much more resilient society. But of course, the challenges are severe. The economic impact is felt very strongly. But thanks to the support of our citizens and the support of our international partners, Moldova is not just muddling through, but achieving meaningful progress, being a candidate to join the EU.
Well, this is key, and the key here is, I think of Romania, is Admiral Stavridis and others have said, the build out of the Navy on the Black Sea of Romania, north of Turkey, south of all the tragedy of Odessa, Mariupol, and that. What do you need from the EU right now to protect the independence of Moldova?
Well, the support that we receive to boost our defense capabilities is important. But just as important is the economic support to maintain the macro-financial stability in the country in light of the high inflation that we saw 2-3 years ago, the highest in Europe as a result of Russian energy blackmail. But now things are going back to normal. Inflation has stabilized and is back to about 5%. And we hope, they say hope is not a great strategy, but more often than not it's the only thing we have. We hope that the worst is behind us. And now we can plan ahead. We just had the Moldova Partnership Platform last week, where international community has come to Chisinau and provided pledges of support and actual support to us, for us to invest in infrastructure, to be better positioned as a logistics hub to help Ukraine when the reconstruction time comes. So those are the type of things that our partners are helping Moldova with. And of course, investments. We cannot emphasize enough that international support and budget support is great, but there is nothing better than investment that provides a dignified job at home. And we're also working with our partners to provide risk insurance for potential investors from US, from Europe. So that's something that could be of interest to your audience.
As Mr. Zelensky makes his way to Washington and presents his victory plan to President Biden and Vice President Harris, there's this conversation that's been swirling around New York over the course of this week, but around the world for longer than that, about sort of how that conflict ends. I want to ask you about a phrase that you know well, and that is a frozen conflict, how a country deals with that, going back to 1992 in your country's case, where things aren't settled ultimately or finally, things fester for longer than that. What does your country's experience with that tell us about how we should look at the endgame here when it comes to Ukraine and Russia?
You're totally right. We have experience, unfortunately, with a frozen conflict, which is certainly stifling a country's development. We have all been held hostage, not just Moldova proper, the constitutionally controlled part of Moldova, but also the separatist entity, the Transnistrian region of the Republic of Moldova. This is a challenge for our development, and we would not wish to anyone to have a frozen conflict, because that undercuts the economic potential and the well-being of the country.
We continue with Mihail Popsoy. He is Moldova's Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, an important voice at the UN meetings in New York City this week. The fact is, in the civics that David Gura and I struggled through, and I'm not going to mince words, we spent, what, an hour, 50 minutes on Moldova, you know, in high school and college.
Yeah,
Fair enough.
Yeah.
The distance here. The fact is, you are the nexus between Russia coming south and the Ottoman Empire years ago moving north. To David's question on stability, given what you see in Erdogan's Turkey, the iterations of Erdogan's Turkey, when do you get stability? Is it about Russia, or is it about relationships with Turkey?
Well, our relationship with Turkey are great. The stability in the Transnistrian region of the Republic of Moldova is also ensured by our policy to only engage in a peaceful settlement. We don't see any other solution other than a peaceful settlement of the conflict, which in fact there is no conflict. There was an artificial construct, the struggle that we had in the early 90s. Because at the people's level, there is no problem. So we are determined to maintain peace and stability in the Republic of Moldova. And of course, we count on the international partners to helping Ukraine. Because our stability, of course, rests to a large degree on developments in Ukraine.
Then what do you need from the United States of America to assist Ukraine to the north and east?
The most important is for Ukraine to have the support that it needs to be able to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Because if we don't allow countries to defend themselves and we end up in a situation where might makes right, then this is a recipe for disaster down the road in many other hotspots in the world. So we need to make sure that international community stands by international law and international humanitarian law and provides Ukraine all the support that it needs to defend all the values that we share together.
Deputy Prime Minister, thank you for joining Bloomberg today. Mahal Popsoy with us, Moldova's Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs. I mean, you get out the map. You know, my knowledge of Liechtenstein, and, you know, name 6 other countries in Moldova, we're ugly Americans. I mean, Lisa, I'm not proud of it. I mean, folks, before this interview, I had to prepare and like, okay, where's it on the map? That's how ignorant we are in America.
And I think it's a challenge here as this conflict persists between Ukraine and Russia, getting Americans to understand the importance of it. Both to the country itself and geopolitically. And I think there have been some inroads there, but I think, as you say, there are a lot of people in this country who don't grasp the magnitude and significance of it.
Mahal, are you surviving the traffic of Midtown Manhattan? It's not always like this.
He
it's
might
your
have
fault.
an escort. He might have an easier time.
I do not have an escort. It's been hectic, but it's been a very productive week. And
in what way? Quickly here, in what way?
Oh, I've had some great bilateral meetings with the Foreign Minister of India, of Egypt, our good friends and brothers from Romania, and many other good friends.
Try to get the Sarah Best for the leek in Gruyere omelet. It's really good there. Central Park South. Mahal Popsoy again from Moldova. Thank you so much for joining us. It has been an extraordinary week in Manhattan and the 5 boroughs of New York City. Miles Miller leading our coverage with Michael Barr of the turmoil in political New York City, an indictment of our mayor. We're waiting to see the unsealing of that indictment. David Gura leading our coverage for Bloomberg Surveillance, and the big take, Jennifer Warnes.
We're trying to change the system from within.
Thank you.
I'm coming now, I'm coming to reward them. First, we take Manhattan. Then we take Berlin.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in a fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. David Gura, Tom Keene, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo, Paul Sweeney on sabbatical, getting ready for Duke Week. 11 miles distant.
He'll be back.
But Duke is 4-0, right? Like they're like
That's right.
They're
and
like
UNC
actually
3-1,
well.
so it should be a good match.
How's a UNC quarterback doing in the NFL? He was drafted very high.
Yes.
Enjoying the bench.
Enjoying the bench.
Hasn't really played. Thank you, Rich, for that. I knew that. But there you are.
You going to watch that game?
I'm
get
all
together
over
and watch it.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm looking for Sweeney. He's not at the 50-yard line.
No.
He's at the 40-yard line, closer to what's the name of the bar with the blue cups at Chapel Hill?
Oh, he's not here.
He's not here.
Where they do have the plastic cups.
Yeah, well,
yes.
you know, Paul said he's going to drop by. He's not here to look at the blue cup as well. Duke UNC this week and part of the sport weekend ahead. Our sport weekend is exceptional news flow for Friday. There's no other way to put it. China over 3 days with major monetary and fiscal announcements. We'll see if the reality turns in. Futures up 48. Dow futures up 200. The VIX 15.17. We had economic data as well. And then a political maelstrom as well. There was a presidential discussion. I guess we can get to that. But all eyes here at Bloomberg 1130 AM in New York City focused on the immediate news, David Gura, for the mayor of New York. What do we see?
Yeah, Eric Adams indicted. That indictment has not been unsealed. We're awaiting that. We don't know when that's going to happen today, but it will. We'll learn more about the charge or charges against him, but reportedly tied to allegations of corruption involving Turkey and campaign donations. So a lot of questions and the summation here of a lot of investigations that have taken place over many months.
From the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
And we have futures advancing after China pledged fiscal stimulus and also the latest economic data, boosting sentiment. Tech shares climbing. We have NASDAQ futures up more than 1.5%. That's thanks to a lift from Micron Technology. Had a strong revenue forecast from AI demand. We have Micron up 17%. If you check in with other chip players, NVIDIA, AMD up more than 2%. ASML, those ADRs up about 5%. S&P futures up 0.8%. We have Dow futures up 0.4%. The 2-year yield 4.59%. That's up 3 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 3.80%, and that's up 1 basis point. Few companies making news. Citigroup teaming up with Apollo Global Management in the private credit market. They're agreeing to work together on a $25 billion worth of deals. That's over the next 5 years. Then you have OpenAI. Sources saying Sam Altman may become $10 million richer. That's through OpenAI's for-profit move, which would give him a 7% stake. And finally, Southwest Airlines authorized a new $2.5 billion stock buyback program. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and David.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. Joining us in our studios right now, Drew Mattis with MetLife, and I can't say how this is the perfect guest at the perfect time. He's got a framework on the American economy, decades with Maury Harris at UBS, now holding court at MetLife, folding it more into market strategy as well. What are you writing about today in this exceptional news flow?
Well, I guess, when I look at the market, I'm trying to figure out why 10-year yields are so low. You look at growth, look at inflation. Growth is actually doing okay. Inflation's still elevated. Why are people pricing in hundreds of basis points of rate cuts through, even through January?
Do you see the unemployment rate moving?
Oh, I'm
higher?
sure. I am sure the unemployment rate is going to move higher. I think we saw in the consumer confidence data that, something's gone wrong with consumer confidence, but it doesn't seem like it's affected the spending yet, right? So, depressed people spend a lot of money.
Let me pick up on that. We had Dana Peterson from the Conference Board on yesterday and dug through a number of those numbers. Let's start with the headline surprise of what you make of it, so picking up on the question that you asked rhetorically there. But then looking more granularly at it, still spending on services, this new kind of heightened anxiety about the direction of interest rates. What stood out to you as you looked at those data?
What stood out to me was the labor differential. When I kind of look at the confidence data, when I look at the data that came out this morning, what stood out to me was that there's nothing bad, right? I mean, claims were low. Inflation was what you expected. Growth was decent. There just wasn't anything that would suggest you should be in a rate cutting cycle if inflation's close to 3%.
I asked this earlier. I'll put it to you as well. The paramount importance of the inflation data that we're going to get tomorrow, is it less important than it was? How do you see it now in this kind of broader context of assessing, yes, the state of the economy, but also the path forward for the Fed?
I mean, I think the path of inflation is pretty well set, but that doesn't mean that a small surprise tomorrow couldn't completely disrupt the Fed's the Fed's views. The issue when they went 50 was not that they went 50 that meeting. It's that they ratified the entire curve out to 2025 of expectations for where they were going to take rates. And those expectations had gotten a little, crazy. And so by going 50, they've basically told people, you're not crazy. That's a potential pathway for us. And unwinding that is going to be very difficult for them, and it's going to create risks in the market that I don't think are fully appreciated yet.
I look at the mix. I keep going back, folks, to you'd hang and time would stop as the Union Bank of Switzerland put out their note. It was Maury Harris and this young Turk, Drew Mattis and others, and you'd always have a chart that was like, you got to be kidding me. What's Drew Mattis's you got to be kidding me chart at MetLife right now?
Well, so first of all, the reason that happened is because we were putting it out at like 11:45 at night on Friday.
I know. Maury was terrible. He was impossible. He was like one big. Maury Harris was one long HR violation. Continue.
I would say what I consider to be the most interesting chart right now is the linkage between the job openings unemployment ratio and where wages go 6 months from that time. And when I look at that, we're actually hitting a part of that curve, right? If you draw it and put all the little dots and then you draw your little curve there, we're on the part of the curve that's the steepest. And so a small change in that job openings unemployment ratio, which is what we're seeing because unemployment's gone higher and job openings have come down, means a pretty rapid deceleration in the rate of wage growth. And that should be good news for the Fed if they're worried about inflation. It does point to inflation going lower over time. That's why I'm not really worried about inflation in 6 months. But that doesn't mean inflation tomorrow couldn't be bad news for everybody.
How impenetrable a barrier is the election in early November as you look out to what's to come? Is it something that you can see around? Is it something where you want to see around it to look at sort of what the potential policy implications might be? How are you thinking about it? How are you thinking about sort of the magnitude or importance of it?
Well, I've got a prediction for the election.
All right, very good.
Volatility.
Volatility.
It's very hard to see past the election. Yeah. Some of the policies that people are expressing require congressional approval. Some of them do not. And so in some ways, this whole idea that it'll be okay because there's going to be divided government no matter what happens, that's not a given. In particular for some of the policies that could generate inflation or risk to the growth outlook.
Our friend David Gura from D.C. was on yesterday of Bloomberg News, and we talked about the absence of deficit hawks. And as you listen to these candidates talk about their plans, and yes, some, as you say, would require the support of lawmakers to get through, there isn't much of a nod to how they're going to be paid for. There isn't much anxiety about the deficit debt in this country. How big a problem is that?
Well, I thought that was Lisa's job.
That was Lisa's, yes.
Because she is the deficit hawk.
Yes.
I would say that when you... the lack of people being worried about the deficit is a problem, and I think but at the same point, it hasn't been a problem, and it doesn't seem likely like it's going to be a problem right up until you get a really, really bad auction or something goes wrong, right? Everything's fine. Turkeys have great lives right up until, Thanksgiving Day, right? So the first 11 months, it seems like things are going wonderfully. And then it's that one day just is really, really bad.
Drew Mattis, thank you. Brilliant there on this job openings versus unemployment rate dynamic. Classic Drew Mattis. He is with MetLife and their chief market strategist. We need to correct the record, folks. Surveillance correction from Friday's show last week. Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney were holding court. They were speaking with Schiller of Brown University, Professor Wendy Schiller, and this about the uproar about Springfield, Ohio, and former President Trump going to visit Springfield, Ohio, and of course with all of the pet eating conspiracy, as I guess Mr. Trump would mention. Professor Schiller at the time inadvertently said Springfield, Illinois, instead of Ohio. We just want to clarify here at Bloomberg Surveillance. this point this morning. It is Springfield, Ohio, 338 miles to the east from Abraham Lincoln, Springfield, Illinois. We thank many for pointing out that correction. Futures advanced. Drew Mattis driving the market higher. See how he does that?
Single-handedly.
It's amazing. Futures up 50.50. S&P futures, Dow futures up 222. John Tucker's 401k almost solvent. With our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. David, Lisa. New York City Mayor Eric Adams has been indicted following a federal corruption investigation. Bloomberg's John Tucker has more.
Michael, the New York Times is reporting federal agents this morning swept in to search Gracie Mansion, of course, the official residence of Mayor Adams. The search of Gracie Mansion on the Upper East Side, it started around 6 a.m. The Times reports a group of roughly a dozen men and women in business attire arrived outside the entrance in SUVs, at least one of which had a federal law enforcement parking placard. Several carried briefcases, backpacks, or duffel bags as they entered the grounds. It's a pretty stunning and aggressive move right now by the feds. Michael.
Thank you very much, John Tucker. Now, according to Adams' attorney, federal agents appeared this morning at Gracie Mansion in an effort to create a spectacle and once again take Mayor Adams' phone. He has not been arrested and looks forward to his day in court. Florida residents along the Panhandle are bracing for the impact of Hurricane Helene later tonight, with time running out for many to seek shelter elsewhere before the storm arrives. Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolyn has more on the Category 2 hurricane.
We've already seen numerous flash flood warnings issued in the rain out ahead of the circulation from parts of southern Georgia up across western South Carolina and into southwestern Virginia. The flooding from this rainfall moving out of the Gulf of Mexico is just going to worsen as the day goes on. Helene is going to bring strong winds and the potential for isolated tornadoes to portions of western and west central Florida today, and that potential for tornadoes will move northward into the eastern Florida Panhandle, Georgia, and the Carolinas overnight and tomorrow. I'm Rob Carolyn, Bloomberg Radio.
Thank you very much, Rob. Storm surges could be as high as 20 feet. Israel ordered the military to maintain its bombardment of Hezbollah targets in Lebanon and denied interest in a truce deal. The U.S., France, and allies proposed a 3-week pause to allow for talks. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, David, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. I got 2 ways to go here. Should we talk about the bond market, Ian Lingard out? Let me do it quickly. The jobless claim print is defying the market's response. That from Ian Lingard looking here. He's looking out like Bramo to the 7-year auction. It's in the
Counting
middle,
down the minutes.
It's in the middle of surveillance nap. I know. Okay, we got that out of the way. How much fun am I having watching a baseball team with 12 rookies? They all look like 1 year out of the College World Series. Can anybody on the Detroit Tigers shave 7 days a week?
I have to say, and maybe I know some people in the Detroit, it's a little hyperbole, but to me, this is one of the greatest moments ever in the Detroit Tiger history. Because you knew in '84 you had a great team. Yeah, nobody saw this coming.
Yeah, no one saw this coming. It's exciting, and they're like really on the cusp today or tomorrow with the White Sox, the dreaded White Sox, getting it done. But I tell you, folks, if you're not onto baseball, just follow the dreaded Detroit Tigers. Half the team can't drink. They can't get into a bar.
A.J. Hinch has to tell them, no drinking.
Manager Hinch getting it ready. They have, today they may have 3 relievers pitch just to get to the 9th inning. Bloomberg surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Well, after taking a breather yesterday, we've got some green on the screen with tech leading the gains this morning. NASDAQ futures up more than 1.5% at 20,528. We have Dow futures up 0.5% at 42,491. S&P futures up 0.8% at 5,828. The two-year yield 3.58%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 3.77%, and that's down 1 basis point. Stocks in China, Hong Kong rose more than 4% after Beijing pledges stronger policy support for the economy. Checking with U.S.-listed China stocks, for example, Alibaba, ADRs up 7%. Over to commodities. Oil falling for a second day. We have Brent crude right now at $71 a barrel. WTI crude at $67 a barrel. Then we have silver surging to its highest level since 2012. We have gold, spot gold higher at $2,664 an ounce. To earnings we go. CarMax, better than expected second quarter sales. But here's the thing, its auto finance income dropped nearly 14.5% year over year. Shares are down 6%. And shares of IT services company Accenture up 5%, beat earnings estimate, raised its dividend. After the close, it's on to Costco. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. Lisa Mateo, that's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Are you on to Costco this weekend?
I am, yes.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Sales are going to rise. You're welcome.
We did the photograph of your freezer out in the garage. You know, there's something.
Yes. You have to have the extra freezer.
You
need
have to
it.
have the
You gotta have the extra heat in
No.
it.
Sadly, the Brooklyn Manse does not have
I'm
space for
trying to get a freezer.
external freezer.
I'm trying to get a freezer next to the bar cart to keep the glasses cold, but that doesn't really count. That's not like a Costco thing.
No, right next to the kegerator.
How far out do you buy like a basic staple for the freezer?
Years.
I do, yeah.
You got a year's supply of hamburger?
No, like I go a month. I have a good month in there. Yeah,
Okay.
and then I replenish.
Your Costco report.
You're going to what, Minetta Tavern, month by month?
Yeah, month
That's where
by
you're
month.
getting the beef.
Depends. I want to sit down to the left or the right, depending on what's going on with the fancy people in
All right.
West Village. Joining us now, this is important here. Again, futures up 50, Dow futures up 219. If you're just joining us across the nation, a bid to China, and then a rebid here about an hour ago with economic data and such. A nice lift to the market. All right, on NASDAQ up 1.7% on futures. Another economic brief. And why are we doing this? We're doing this because all of this market hinges on the economy. She's lucky. She's at BMO Capital Markets, so Jennifer Lee gets to throw things at Ian Lingen, who's just wonderful in the fixed income market. She's not on speaking terms with Brian Belsky in equities. Jennifer Lee, synthesize for me, you guys at BMO Capital are just killing it. Lingen looked for lower yields. Belsky's been a confirmed bull. What are you telling them that makes this market move?
So good morning, and thanks for having me on. By the way, I love Ian and I love Brian, who should be across the hall from me right now.
there at BMO.
So, I mean, obviously things have been not as bad as many economists had expected. You know, we are continuing to stay in that whole soft landing camp, which is helping, which, Brian is obviously online with as well. And hence he's been a lot more optimistic, or still optimistic as well. But again, things are just tapping on the brakes, as I say, month after month. We're seeing slower economic data in general, but totally to be expected. But we're not slamming on the brakes. We got some decent numbers this morning on GDP. On the UI claims front, durables were okay as well. So again, tapping on the brakes, and that's what I guess that's the best that we can hope for at this point.
Jennifer, something that we talked about yesterday was how abnormal this moment is, how far we are from what we would consider to be normalcy when it comes to the economy and monetary policy. And I'd love your perspective on that as well, as you kind of chart out what the Fed may or may not do, how you acknowledge the kind of strangeness of where we are.
Great question. So the strangeness is that after 525 basis points of rate hikes, the U.S. economy still has to take a significant step back. Again, tapping on the brakes and all that. But, and I'll be quite honest here, I was not in the 50 basis point rate cut camp. I was actually assuming it was going to be 25. So I won't tell you what words came out of my mouth when I saw the announcement. But I mean, I understand, he was saying, Fed Chair Powell was saying the economy is still in decent shape. The U.S. labor market is still also in decent shape. So let's just basically give them some. It's almost like, I guess, you're kind of on the way to being sick, but you're not really full on sick yet. So let's give you some medicine now to avoid that being full on sick, if you know what I mean.
Jennifer, give us a clinic on tomorrow at 8:30. PCE is the Fed's favorite inflation indicator. I get it. But are we I'm thinking Lawrence Summers, are we going to hear from PCE tomorrow stagflation or some other grand theme?
So that's another great question. So we're looking for roughly steady-ish reading on the deflator, just about a 0.2% increase month to month, about 2.6, 2.7 year over year. It's all going to be about focusing on normally I would say spending, but also the wages and salaries component of workers that continue to see a steady rise in wages and salary, which is, I think, the most important part of all of this, because consumers need, a job, they need steady wages, steady income, just that security to give them confidence for the future. I think that is what is critical. So looking at what people are making on a month-to-month basis, and of course what they're spending on. And the last report on retail sales, if I can remember, it wasn't exactly broad-based strength. There was actually quite a few sectors that we're seeing that saw a decline in sales, but even the discretionary items were a little bit, we saw some up and some down. Dining out was flat. So I still think we are still seeing, some, consumers are still spending. They are still making a decent wage, but they're definitely more cautious on what they are spending on.
Jennifer, let me ask you about the knock-on effects of the decision from last week as we look at Switzerland today, perhaps as we cast our eye to Beijing as well and what that bank is doing. You may not have gotten the 50 basis points move right. I think 9 PhDs did for many hundreds of them. We'll forgive that. But is this playing out the way that you thought it would, that now that we're in this rate cutting cycle, we are seeing movement and change among other central banks around the world?
So a lot of the central banks, I think, because I think credibility is a huge factor for all central bankers. Without it, they got nothing, right? So I think everyone has been very cautious on moving, especially the Federal Reserve. But now we're starting to see a little bit more. I'm starting to think maybe a bit more anxiety, only because all of a sudden we're seeing these 50 basis point moves. I think it was yesterday, was it the Riksbank yesterday that said, that they're going to, they cut 25, and then they said, then they gave lots of forward guidance. We're going to be cutting for the other 2 meetings that remain for the rest of this year. And one of them could be a 50 basis pointer. So it seems like we're seeing more of that lately. So a tinge more anxiety of perhaps just again to cut off the slowdown, before it gets off too much. And then of course with China, a whole series of, they're acting almost every day this week. And of course this, I don't know how much it's going to help the Chinese economy overall, because it's all about households and consumer confidence and all that. But I think this morning's news gives us a little bit more hope that, that they are going to do whatever it takes, to borrow from Mario Draghi, to get to that about 5% growth target.
Jennifer, thank you. Jennifer Lee, BMO Capital Markets, with us here, looking at the economy, and the clear message there for me, folks: solid economy, and you see it with domestic final sales in her BMO report, really below 3%, but still domestic final sales really pretty darn good. David Gura, it's 9:24 a.m. in the 5 boroughs of New York City. What are we waiting for exactly this morning? We're waiting for a car cavalcade to a federal court, helicopters and all that. Are we waiting just to get to court, or waiting for something that will come over the wires?
I'm going to send a message to our colleagues down at Pearl Street and see what we can expect in terms of how this is going to unfold over the course of the day. But I think that all eyes right now are still on Gracie Mansion, where, at least if you read the New York Times, federal agents are still searching the residence of the New York City mayor. And something else that stands out to me here, in Michael Rothfeld's latest, one of the reporters who broke that story for the Times last night, noting that Alex Spiro is one of Mayor Adams' attorneys. Alex Spiro of Quinn Emanuel was also one who represented Elon Musk, among other big names. So the mayor has hired some big guns here to represent him. As he said in that statement last night from Gracie Mansion, the charges are false, whatever they may be, and he intends to fight them and stay on as mayor.
In 20 seconds, Governor Hochul put out a terse 26-word note, right?
Her press secretary did, as we heard from our colleagues. So we'll see what more color we get on that. We know that she does have the power to suspend or remove the mayor. We'll see if we get anywhere near that.
Michael Barr and Miles Miller driving our coverage led by Patricia Hurtado, iconic within New York City reporting. Stay with Bloomberg worldwide for this turmoil in New York. From New York City, Futures up 46. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo alongside Tom Keene and David Gura with your opening bell report. Now, we had a ton of economic data for traders to consider before the open. Showed the economy grew faster than expected in the second quarter. Durable goods orders unchanged. U.S. jobless claims dropped to a four-month low. That defied the hiring slowdown. Applications fell 218,000 last week. Let's get to the numbers, see the reaction on Wall Street. We'll start with the S&P 500, up 0.7%, 43 points at 5,765. We have the Dow up 0.5%, 238 points, 42,136. The Nasdaq up more than 1%, 240 points at 18,320. The two-year yield 3.58%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 3.78%, and that is little change. Commodities, have to point out, spot gold right now higher, $2,667 an ounce. We have Brent crude $71 a barrel, WTI crude $67 a barrel. At the open, have to check in with Micron. It's given a boost to those tech stocks right now, up 18%. We have Nvidia up 2%, AMD up 3%, and finally ASML up 5%. Their ADRs. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Tom and David.
Lisa, thank you so much. Somebody over at the Plaza with the UN meetings and the Earthshot Prize said to me, how do you do it? And the answer is, David and I synthesize this together, reading in. It starts 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and that. And the backbone of what we do is Bloomberg News reporting. For example, within the hour from Tel Aviv, Henry Meyer, with all of his expertise on the Eastern Hemisphere, his years in Moscow, and with Ethan Bronner, Bloomberg Israeli Bureau Chief, with us as well, with his legacy of coverage and an award for the New York Times. Mr. Bronner joins us this morning from a fractured Israel and Lebanon. Ethan, Jomana Bersachi, in her interview with Ahmed Salam of Lebanon, their economy minister, here's the quote from your story. Lebanon, we feel there is a lot of flexibility in the past 24 hours from Hezbollah's side. Discuss that, Ethan. Is there a Hezbollah that Mr. Netanyahu can speak to?
Hi, Tom. I'm not sure. And I'm not sure, in fact, I mean, this is this bizarre relationship between the government in Lebanon and Hezbollah, right? Which is that in the country of Lebanon, the government is less powerful than the militia of Hezbollah. So while he says that, we have also heard nothing official from Hezbollah about desiring to move forward with this ceasefire. And there's another fact, of course, which is that for 8 or 9 days, Israel has been pummeling Hezbollah, first with those booby-trapped pagers and walkie-talkies, and then killing off a bunch of its top people, and then bombing the hell out of a lot of its launchers, a couple of thousand spots. So it may be that Hezbollah is in the mood to talk, and conversely, it looks like Israel, feeling on the horse, is not in the mood to talk.
Ethan, the Prime Minister of Israel is making his way to New York to address the UN tomorrow, and we can talk a bit about that and the postponement of that trip. But let me ask you first, if he meets with another world leader while he's here, and that person says to him, what is the overall strategy? You talk about the explosive devices baked into these walkie-talkies and pagers, the bombardments we've seen since then. What is the answer from the Netanyahu administration about sort of where this leads to or what the broader military strategy is?
So their view is that these militias, like Hamas and Hezbollah, only respond to force. In the case of Hezbollah, don't forget, in 2006, they fought a war. After the war was over, UN Resolution 1701 asserted that Hezbollah would disarm and move 25 to 30 kilometers away from the border with Israel. It was unanimously accepted. They didn't disarm. They didn't move back. In fact, they now have 150 to 200,000 missiles underground, and they are right up against the border. So Israel would say, Netanyahu would say, and on October 8th, we had no quarrel with what was happening in Lebanon because of what was happening with Hamas in Gaza. Hezbollah joined in the fight and continued to pummel us. And now our goal is to get them back and to make it so painful for them that they cry uncle and move back voluntarily. That's what he would say. There's plenty of reasons to think that won't work, but that's what he would say.
Ethan, this is a prime minister who knows how to give a speech. He can command an audience, yes. And we're going to get one tomorrow in the General Assembly building on the east side of Manhattan. Mm-hmm. He'll be fulminating. Do you expect a defensive speech? Do you expect something different? What are we anticipating we'll hear from the prime minister in New York tomorrow? I think
we'll hear from him once again that Iran, the head of the octopus, as Israel views it, has ruined the region. It has undermined the states of Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, and replaced the governments in those countries with militias that are at spec and call. Whether that's exactly true, we can discuss, but that's what he'll say. Right. And that this is a dress rehearsal for the rest of the world, that Iran is in cahoots with Russia, China, and North Korea, and Israel is holding them back.
We continue with Ethan Bronner in Tel Aviv. On the markets, a lift here larger than what we saw with futures. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 235 points with a 42,000 print. We're nearing 5,800. SPX up 35.6%. NASDAQ up 1.2%. Micron, a huge mover today, going back to a jump back to 2011. David Gura?
And Ethan, living where he lives, knows that sometimes interviews are interrupted by reports of corruption involving public officials. So he'll forgive us for that as we move forward here. Give us just the update on what's been happening in the West Bank. I think, as Tom has said, there is so much going on in the region, and our focus has been drawn to Lebanon in recent days. But just give us an update on that other campaign, the initial campaign that we saw in the aftermath of October 7th, and we were talking about just moments before speaking with you. We are approaching here the anniversary of those grievous attacks.
Yes, which you're asking specifically about the West Bank right now?
Yes.
So, the West Bank on October 6th was a place where a couple of 100,000 Palestinians were coming into Israel, working, bringing back large salaries compared to what they could earn at home. And there was, of course, it is an occupied area, militarily occupied. It is no fun to be a Palestinian in the West Bank, but there was not the sense of dread that there has developed since then, which is that their movements are much more restricted. Nobody is coming into work, at least legally. And there is a sense also that there is no future for the Palestinian movement unless there's some link between Gaza and the West Bank. That's how they feel there.
Terrific brief. Ethan Bronner, thank you so much. Our Israel Bureau Chief today from Tel Aviv. We'll continue to monitor. Thanks to Henry Meyer as well for his coverage. There is a single headline here 5 minutes ago. David Gura, I must admit, with all of the preparation and the back and forth, and Miles and Michael Barr telling us, it's a shock to see this headline.
The headline, as we see it, is New York City Mayor Adams issued summons to appear in court on Thursday from the Washington Post. And I will say, kind of following this story, it's amazing to see these reporters who kind of started out their careers covering City Hall in New York, now covering this story here in New York and from afar. Josh Dawsey, Pulitzer Prize winner for the Washington Post, spent a good deal of time at City Hall in New York. He a byline on that story, but giving us an update on what's been taking place here in Manhattan since the early morning hours. Mayor Adams holed up in that house overnight, and we had agents searching it this morning, spending a good deal of time inside Gracie Mansion. We know that he has been indicted. We don't know the contents of that indictment. It has not been unsealed yet, if it's one charge or many. The mayor addressing those charges in a statement last night, a video statement made after he attended a reception with the president and first lady here in New York, tied to the UN General Assembly. He's saying it's his belief that the federal government intends to charge me with federal crimes. If so, he says, these charges will be entirely false, based on lies. He intends to fight them, Tom.
We'll have much more on this morning in the quarter brief coming up momentarily from Michael Barr. The Dow, again, up 0.6%. NASDAQ up 1.3%. The VIX, I'm still not under a 15 to a bull market 14 level at 15.21. Of the oddities on the equity bond currency commodity screen, West Texas Intermediate down $2.38, 3.4%. American oil, $67.32. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. David, Lisa. New York City Mayor Eric Adams is now the first sitting mayor in the city's history to be indicted. The federal charges are still under seal, but the mayor has been under investigation for potential campaign finance violations. Bloomberg's John Tucker has the latest.
Eric Adams is the first mayor in New York City history to be indicted while in office. Sounding bitter and defiant, he released a video statement and refused calls from fellow Democrats to resign.
You elected me to lead this city, and lead it I will. I humbly ask for your prayers and your patience.
The indictment is sealed. Federal investigators had seized Adams' electronic devices nearly a year ago as part of an investigation focused at least partly on campaign contributions and Adams' interactions with the Turkish government. John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
And federal agents also raided Gracie Mansion at dawn, the official residence of the mayor. Fast-moving Hurricane Helene is advancing across the Gulf of Mexico toward Florida, and it has been upgraded to a Category 2 storm. Forecasters say it threatens an unsurvivable storm surge in parts of northwestern Florida. Landfall is expected this evening. There will be no ceasefire. That's from Israel's foreign minister after the U.S. and France proposed a 3-week pause in fighting with Hezbollah targets in Lebanon. Bloomberg's Giovanna Bersecchi has more.
There's a lot of pressure internally about the rising humanitarian toll, the rising number of civilian casualties, and there's pressure, deep pressure on the economy, which already was in a dire straits even before this war started. And then you add to that the other dimension of Iran and Syria and the notable lack of language of them being inclined in any way of getting explicitly involved in this war.
Bloomberg's Giovanna Bersecchi. And finally, Hoda Kotb, a fixture at NBC for more than 2 decades, says she will leave her morning perch on the Today Show early next year. She told staffers it's time. She has co-anchored Today with Savannah Guthrie since 2018. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, David, Lisa.
So much for a quiet September, David Gura. I mean, it's just extraordinary.
Thought we'd ease back in after summer break, but no.
14 people. You were off in Maine picking blueberries with Sale.
Yep.
And I was told 5 times in a row, including Michael Barr telling me, September's a terrible month for the market.
Yes.
It's terrible. Don't be in the market in September. Look at the moonshot we've got right now.
41 times the S&P 500 hit a record high this year? Something like that.
Yeah, we're nudging up. And frankly, thank you, Rich Truman. Appreciate that. But seriously, I see an immense lack of exuberance. It's the oddest bull market ever.
And not much volatility either. Yeah?
Yeah,
you used quiescent already this morning. I don't want to make you use it again.
There's different ways to measure volatility, but the answer is we're just sort of going through this with this huge assumption, as Drew Mattis mentioned, of the interest rates being cut. You know, I mean, this is the great assumption out there, soft landing and all that.
I made that joke about applauding when a plane lands. We're not going to get that this time around. But when are we going to be able to gauge the efficacy of this long fight that the Fed has waged?
The answer is we don't know. What I would really emphasize is how far out of whack we were with these high yields And people underestimate the distance back to normal, the distance back to average. And it is, give or take, 8, 9, 10 more rate cuts. We were a long way to go to get back to some kind of normal. And we'll have to see when that occurs. We'll do that. It keeps us in business here, folks.
That sounded like a song lyric. A long way to go till we get back to
long
normal.
way to go. Yeah, the Eagles did that song. They're out at the Sphere. Have you been to the Sphere?
I haven't been.
Paul Sweeney's probably at the Sphere
he's probably
with the Eagles right now. No, it's Sweeney. He's in the third row back from the Sphere. Dow up 214 right now. SPX up 34 points. NASDAQ up 1.2%. The VIX 15.28. Nationwide on Bloomberg Radio, it's Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We are on records watch after more economic data and more Fed speak. In a pre-recorded video at the U.S. Treasury Market Conference, Chair Jay Powell did not comment on the economic outlook or the trajectory of monetary policy, but he did say that he remains dedicated to the goal of keeping the markets functioning at a high level. Let's get to tech stocks because they're leading the indexes higher thanks to Micron. Micron up about 17%. We have the NASDAQ up more than 1%, 18,275. The Dow up 0.5%. 42,135. The S&P 500 up 0.6% at 5,758. The 2-year yield 3.59%. That's up 3 basis points. A yield on the 10-year 3.79%, and that is little change. To earnings, CarMax up 4%, better than expected second quarter sales. Its auto finance income, though, that dropped 14% year over year. So that's why those shares, they're starting to rise after being lower this morning. We get to IT services company Accenture. They're up about 6%. It beat earnings estimates and also raised its dividend. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and David.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Greatly appreciate it. Dave Brazano with us with Poland Capital here in a moment on high yield. That yield there you can see in bonds. Wonderful to have him on. But first, Rob Carolyn without the hysteria on Helene. Rob Carolyn, why is Helene different?
Because it's tracking up towards the Big Bend area once again, Tom. We went a long time without seeing the Big Bend area of Florida get hit by storms, and then within the last couple of years, that seems to be the spot in Florida that's getting hit because you're dealing with the coast in the shape that it is. The storm surge out ahead of Helene is going to be funneled into that region, and we could see some record storm surge with this system. A 15 to 20-foot storm surge is in the forecast when Helene makes landfall later this evening in the Big Bend area of Florida. Right now, Tom, the winds with the system are sustained at 100 miles an hour. It is certainly going to be a Category 3, could be a Category 4 by the time it makes landfall this evening. It's moving northeast at 12 miles an hour right now. It's almost due west-southwest, a couple hundred miles to the west-southwest of Naples. It looks like we're seeing some feeder bands producing some heavy thunderstorms right now in south-central Florida, much of central and southern Florida under a tornado watch until 8 o'clock. And the other thing we're seeing, Tom, is a PRE, a predecessor rain event across the southeastern United States. There's a frontal boundary in that region in the southern Appalachians. The warm, moist air out ahead of the hurricane producing heavy rain from Georgia and the Florida Panhandle up into West Virginia. We're already seeing flood warnings and flash flood warnings being issued in the mountains of the southern Appalachians, and the hurricane is still offshore South Florida. So some areas in the southern Appalachians, across Georgia up into the western Carolinas, eastern Tennessee could be talking about a 6 to 12-inch rainfall between today and Sunday afternoon.
I look at the latest update from the National Hurricane Center. Preparations to protect life and property should be rushed to completion. Let me ask you, sort of, beyond this part of the Panhandle in Florida, you mentioned what's happening in the Appalachian area as well. How wide an effect is this going to have across the Southeast?
A very wide effect because the system is much larger than what we normally see with a hurricane. This system picked up a lot of moisture in the northwestern Caribbean Sea, so the circulation is a bit larger than some of the hurricanes we've already seen so far this season, and that's why we're looking at advisories for tropical storm force winds from South Florida all the way up through the Carolinas and into parts of southern Virginia. We think the motion of the storm is going to kind of pick up later this afternoon and tonight, and that may have the tendency to bring the core of the strong winds, which will go inland over the Big Bend, up into southern and central Georgia later tonight and tomorrow, which we wouldn't ordinarily see with a hurricane with a smaller circulation.
This has been wonderful, Rob Carolyn. Thank you so much on Helene. We now go to meteorologist David Gura with Poland Capital, head of their credit team, and in Boca Raton, Florida. David, life has changed in Florida, I guess because of warmer oceans, warmer waters. What do you see? I mean, you're removed from the Big Bend, but in Boca Raton, how are you adapting to these new, more persistent, deeper, thicker hurricanes?
Well, we've been, and good morning, Tom. We've been blessed in the last number of years with really not getting the brunt of the hurricanes in this area. It's been on the other coast. Today, right now, it's been windy and rainy. It's dry right now, so we're pretty good. I know they closed some schools here in anticipation, but I really feel for those on the other coast that are in the path of the storm. It's unfortunate.
Lisa Bramowitz briefed me for 2 hours on this conversation. I'm sorry we're squeezing it in so short. David Gura, can spreads go even tighter within the credit space?
They certainly can, but they're pretty tight by historical standards. So we don't anticipate they have much room to go tighter. But the bigger issue really is by credit quality. So the market isn't homogenous. There are double Bs, single Bs, triple Cs, and the spreads are pretty tight on the double B and single B side, but not so tight on the triple C side.
I look at the bond market and it seems easy now. What is the trap now for investors trying to find yield, afraid of this equity market? What's the stumble, the trap for Poland Capital in this bond space?
I'd say really getting too complacent and reaching for yield when one hasn't done thorough credit research. There is risks out there. There are defaults. It's low by historical standards, but they still exist. And the real pitfall is to be complacent, not do one's thorough work, and then sort of getting caught up in the wave. maybe we can touch on it in a minute, but there's been a flood of capital into the private credit market. And when a flood of capital goes into a sector, that concerns me.
So is that an illiquidity question? We're going to have to run because of breaking news. But Dave Rosano, in private credit, is that a challenge to come in 2025?
I believe so. I mean, the lending standards and due diligence, and the experience level of many of the managers there is ripe for some problems. Now, in the aggregate, it should be okay, but individual portfolios or individual situations could be problematic, and that will frighten people and catch people off guard, and then one worries that there's a contagion effect. So that's my concern.
We've been unfair with breaking news, Mr. Rosano. We need to get you on again for a longer duration. Dave Rosano, iconic at Poland Capital, Boca Raton there on high yield and yield in general. In the yield space right now, red and green there, yields have come back a little bit. It's 3.79% on the 10-year yield. It's given me this equity lift up, Dow up 214, along with higher yields. And David Gura, I don't see any immediate news on what we're witnessing in New York City with the mayor, but the China news just reverberates across the nation.
Yeah, day three. That's right. Back-to-back news from the Chinese government about fiscal stimulus and monetary stimulus, and we're seeing that kind of ripple through Asia, across Europe to the U.S. here today, and then just getting everyone up to speed on where things stand here in New York City, where we are. The mayor, Eric Adams, indicted. We don't know the substance of that indictment yet. We have the Washington Post reporting that he's been issued a summons to appear in court downtown later today. Obviously, we'll be tracking that, and Bloomberg Radio will bring you an update on everything that we find out about what's in that indictment as soon as we learn.
So thank you to Laura Navajas. Miles Miller appearing with us earlier, and the iconic Patricia Hurtado for their coverage here, including attendance at Gracie Mansion on the East River as well. What are you going to do on the big take today? Got something, Detroit Tigers, or
well, we'll see. I feel like
Midtown traffic.
Doing this with you this week has pulled me away from it more than I'd like. But we'll get into politics certainly as the week comes to a close and we get sort of new polling information. We get tons of polling this time of year.
Do you believe in the polls? This is a legitimate question.
I believe in the polls broadly, and looking at them all together. I'm skeptical of them kind of in separately.
Right.
But I think when you see trends among them, that's important to me.
Can I give some good news?
Yeah.
Out on Twitter, she is absolutely iconic. Ann Wilson of Heart, with incredibly good news in her battle with cancer. Her chemotherapy has been plus, plus, plus. She will tour with her sister Nancy next year.
Today, I had to turn my heart away. Smile like the sun, kisses forever. And tales it never fails. You lie so low in the weeds. I bet you wanna ambush me. You have me down, 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 down on my knees. Now would you, Barracuda?